A sandstorm swallows on the vast Egyptian desert, hiding the sun into a golden mantle that seems eternal. The earth cuts under the weight of time, and in its silence resonates an ancient murmur, as if the soil itself tells forgotten stories. Here, entre Rio Serpentiantes and motionless dunes, was born more than a civilization, a divine connection between men and the universe emerged. An intimate relationship that each act of everyday life is woven in the invisible threads of the gods. In Egypt, each dawn was more than the arrival of the sun, it was the renaissance of Ra, the great creator, sailing through the sky in his solar boat, beating the snake of chaos that threatened to devour the light. Each grain of wheat that grew in the fertile fields of the Nile was not only the fruit of nature, but a tangible gift of Osiris, whose sacrifice brought prosperity to earth. Thus, every breath, every step, carried a sacred weight, an echo of the divine that felt as close as the heat of the sun on the skin. People not only lived surrounded by myths, they lived within them. It was impossible to ignore the presence of the gods when the entire world seemed designed by them. The Nile River was not just a river, it was the vital artery of a nation, a symbol of continuity, fertility, and renewal. The wind that whispered among the palm trees was not simply a natural phenomenon, it was Shu's voice, filling the air with the breath of life. And when a storm shook the sands, it was not the chance that acted, but Set, roaring with its unleashed force. But it wasn't just the environment that remembered the gods. Life itself was a ritual in his honor. From birth to death, each stage was guided by them. At birth, a baby's crying was wrapped in Isis's blessing, the Great Mother, who protected with her infinite love. In marriage, Hathor smiled from heaven, bringing joy and passion to new lovers. And when the final moment came, Anubis took the deceased hand in hand, guiding him solemnly to the Osiris trial, where the heart would be heavy against Mat's pen. It was a connection that I did not understand of distances. The pharaohs, live incarnations of Horus, were destined to govern with justice and wisdom, as a reflection of the gods on earth. But even the most humble peasant, who spent his days under the scorching sun cultivating the land, knew that his work was observed and blessed by a force major. Each prayer, each offering, was a direct conversation with the cosmos, an act of faith as powerful as life itself. On this earth, the past was never really past. The myths were more than stories, they were the blood that ran through the veins of a nation. Each statue in the temples, each hieroglyph recorded on the walls, was a tangible reminder that the gods were present, observing, acting, molding the destination. And when the stars shone in the night sky, they were not just distant lights, they were the souls of the righteous, guided by the eternal love of Nut, the goddess of the sky. But the gods not only represented goodness and protection. They were also strength, fight, and sometimes terror. They were a mirror of the world itself, with all their beauty and cruelty. In his myths there were chaos, betrayal and revenge, but also redemption, love and hope. Each god was a reminder that life, with his high and low, was a reflection of the universal order, a delicate balance between Mat, order, and Isfet, chaos. And so, day after day, the Egyptians lived knowing that they were not alone. There were gods in the storms, in the fields, in the rivers, and in their hearts. Each Dinosaur brought the promise of a new chapter in the sacred history they shared with them. But with each sunset, the uncertainty of darkness, of the unknown, came from what would come later. As the sun disappeared on the horizon, and the shadows of the night extended on the desert, a question resonated in the air: how to keep light in a world that never stops changing. A question that takes us to the next chapter, where a figure with golden wings and hawk look emerges to remind us that the fight for light is not over. In the beginning, there was no firm land, no blue sky. There was only the Nun, an infinite and silent ocean of liquid darkness. It was a place where there were no limits, where everything and nothing coexisted in the same beat, an eternal chaos that awaited the time to become something else. In that deep abyss, time made no sense, and the universe slept, not yet born, in a state of waiting that seemed eternal. But even in the darkest depth, something began to stir. From that form without form the spark of creation arose, an act as violent as beautiful, as inevitable as the sunrise. In the city of Hermopolis, the wise spoke of 8 primary forces, the Ogdoad, who lived in the Nun, for couples of gods and goddesses, symbols of vacuum, darkness, infinity and hidden. Amun and Amonit, he and Horhet, Kuk and Korkit, Nun and Nornit. Together, they embodied the potential of everything that was to come, invisible forces that shaped chaos. From this sea, according to the priests of Heliopolis, a primary hill emerged, the Ben, a piece of land that rose like a miracle in the middle of the water. There, at the top of that sacred mound, Atum appeared, the first of the gods, who created the universe with just one thought. Atum, in his solitude, looked at the void and decided to fill it. With an act of strength and will, he gave life to himself and then gave birth to Shu, the air, and Tefnut, the humidity. They were his children, and together they shaped heaven and earth. Shu and Tefnut wandered by chaos, separating the Nun in heaven and earth. On their journey, they lost their way, and Atum, worried, shed tears of joy when they found them again. From those tears were born the first humans, fragile and small, but with a piece of the divine in their hearts. Thus, men became part of the great network that linked the gods and the world. In Memphis, the priests told a different story, but equally powerful. They said it was Ptah, the great craftsman, who created everything with his word. He did not need hands or tools, everything that existed, from the mountains to the stars, was pronounced by his lips. His heart imagined the universe, and his tongue brought him to existence. Everything that eyes could see, every shadow and every ray of light, was part of Ptah's masterpiece, the god who gave life to the cosmos with the power of thought and the word. However, not everything was order. The Nun was still present, as a reminder that chaos never disappears completely. The gods constantly fought to keep it at bay, because the balance was fragile, and every day brought with it the risk of chaos claiming what it had lost. Even the sun, as bright and eternal as it seemed, had to be reborn every morning, emerging from the waters of the Nun to bring light to the world once more. In this constant struggle, the Egyptian universe found its truth: creation was not a unique act, but an eternal cycle. The world was not a finished gift, but a continuous challenge, a balance that should be maintained every day with effort and faith. The first gods understood this, and their stories resonated in every corner of ancient Egypt, from the stones of the temples to the whisper of the wind between the Nile reeds. But as the sun raised and fell, and the men looked at the horizon, a majestic figure emerged, with golden feathers and eyes that shone like stars. Horus, the son of Osiris, awaited in the heart of this cosmic narrative, ready to claim order in a world full of challenges. The air in Egypt seemed loaded with something more than heat. Every corner of the world was impregnated with a divine presence, as if the wind, the stars, and the Nile were threads interwoven by invisible hands. It was not chaos of scattered deities, it was a divine society, a system as organized and complex as the human life itself, where every god had a place, a role, and a purpose. On the cusp was Ra, the sun, whose boat crossed the sky during the day and sailed through the Duat's dark waters at night. Ra was more than a light source, it was the engine that kept the entire universe in motion. His solar disk, crowned by a protective snake, was the symbol of absolute power, of the cycle of life and the constant fight against chaos. Beside him, Isis, the Great Mother, wove the threads of magic and love. His throne-shaped headdress and open arms were a shelter for those in need, a reminder that the greatest power was not strength, but unconditional love. The myths told how she gathered the pieces of Osiris, her husband, returning her life with her tears and her determination. For the Egyptians, Isis was not just a goddess, it was hopeful hope. Osiris, with her green skin and her Atef crown, ruled the underworld. He was not a tyrannical king, but a fair judge, the bearer of the resurrection. Each wheat spike that grew in the fields was an echo of their sacrifice, a reminder that death was not the end, but a door toward something else. With the Hika scepter in one hand and the Nekek whip in the other, Osiris symbolized the balance between authority and protection. Near him, Anubis watched with his face as a jackal, serene and mysterious. His black skin evoked the fertile slim of the Nile, while his eyes seemed to cross souls. Anubis not only guided the dead, he weighed his hearts against Mat's pen, the symbol of truth and order. And in that crucial moment, the Egyptians found not only justice, but also comfort, knowing that their actions in life would be measures with honesty. Horus, with his hawk head and his eye that sees everything, represented heaven and the protection of the pharaoh. His eye, the Ujat, was not just a healing symbol, it was the triumph over evil, an amulet that the Egyptians carried close to their hearts. Horus was the protector, the warrior who never rested in his fight against Set, the god of chaos. Set, on the other hand, was a complex figure, with a human body and a head that no one could identify at all. It was chaos, the storm, but also the force that protected Ra during his night trip. It was feared and respected, a duality that the Egyptians understood well, because chaos was not just destruction, it was also change and renewal. In everyday life, Hathor smiled from the stars. With her cow horns that held the solar disk, she was joy, music and love. His festivals were full of songs and dances, reminding everyone that happiness was also a divine gift. Meanwhile, Bastet, with his feline grace, protected the homes and hearts of his faithful. Bastet was calm and fury, tenderness and strength, a perfect balance that resonated in the movements of each sacred cat that was around temples. Every god had their place, but together they formed a whole. As in a great family, their relationships were complex, full of love, betrayal, forgiveness, and struggle. The Egyptians looked at these stories and saw their own dilemmas, their own emotions. The hierarchy of the gods was not abstraction, it was a mirror of the universe, a guide to understand the world and themselves. The pharaoh, incarnation of Horus on earth, acted as the bridge between men and the gods. His government was not only earthly, each decree, each ritual, was part of the great cosmic gear that maintained balance. But the pharaoh was not alone. Common people, with their humble offerings of bread and flowers, contributed to this balance, ensuring that the gods remained strong and vigilant. And in each temple, in each statue erected with devotion, there was a whisper of eternity. The walls covered with hieroglyphs told the exploits of the gods, their triumphs and their sorrows, as a constant reminder that the order should be preserved. However, among the reliefs, a winged figure was hidden, always vigilant. Horus, the protector, waited for his time to get up against the forces that threatened to unleash chaos once more. The Nile flowed like a living artery through Egypt, joining not only fertile lands but also the kingdoms of the human and the divine. But in its waters and banks there was not only life, there were myths, imbued places of a sacred energy that resonated with the echoes of the gods. Each city, each temple, seemed to beating to the beat of an invisible universe, connecting the earthly to the eternal. In Heliopolis, the place where the sun rose, time seemed to stop. There, where Atum first emerged from the Nun chaos, the priests kept Ben, the sacred stone that symbolized the birth of the universe. It was a place where dawn had a special weight, where every ray of light that touched the earth was a reminder that chaos had been defeated by order, at least one more day. Heliopolis was not just a city, it was the axis where he renewed his daily promise to illuminate the world. Further south, in Memphis, was the creative heart of the cosmos. Here, Ptah, the great craftsman, shaped everything that exists with the word and thought. In this place, the temples rose as physical manifestations of their creative power, each stone placed with an almost divine purpose. In their cameras, the priests invoked Ptah's power to protect the stability of the world, aware that even the smallest imbalance could open the door to chaos that always stalked. However, it was in Thebes where the connection between the gods and men reached their greatest splendor. There, the Karnak temple extended as a maze of columns and rooms dedicated to Amun-Ra, the king of the gods. Crossing its Avenida de Respinges was like entering another dimension, a space where air seemed to vibrate with divine energy. In its courtyards, the sky seemed closer, and each prayer rose like a thread of smoke towards the eternal. In Thebes, the pharaoh, accompanied by priests and faithful, reaffirmed his role as a mediator between the gods and the people, strengthening the cosmic order. But the mythical places not only lived in the cities, they were also in the landscapes. In Abydos, the sand seemed to breathe with the presence of Osiris. This sacred place, known as the point where the god of the underworld was buried, was a magnet for pilgrims who sought to connect with the promise of life after death. The ceremonies made there were a reflection of the myths of Osiris, a living representation of the eternal cycle of death and resurrection. In Edfu, the temple dedicated to Horus was a monument to the eternal struggle between order and chaos. Their reliefs told the history of epic combat between Horus and Set, a stone engraving that the battle for balance never ceases. In its enclosures, the air seemed loaded with the force of the hawk, and each shadow evoked the movement of its wings. The Egyptians who came to this temple not only found stories, they felt the power of Horus echoing in their hearts. Further north, in Bastet, the atmosphere changed. Here, Bastet reigned, and energy was calm and protection. The sacred cats wandered free by the temples, symbols of divine surveillance. The festivities in his honor filled the air with music, dance, and joy, a breath of light in a world where darkness was always on the prowl. Even the desert had its place in this sacred geography. In the vast and desolate landscapes that surrounded the Valley of the Kings, the presence of Set, the god of the storm and chaos, was felt. Although feared, Set was not hated. The Egyptians knew that their strength was necessary to maintain balance. In these inhospitable places, sandstorms seemed to be whisper of their power, reminders that chaos is never too far away. Each of these places, each temple and each landscape, was not just a construction or natural formation. They were doors toward something bigger, points where the human and the divine were intertwined. But while the Egyptians venerated these spaces, their eyes always looked at the horizon, looking for signs of what was to come. In the desert sands, something else seemed to move, something that was not yet completely revealed. A shadow, perhaps, or the echo of some wings that extended, preparing the ground for a new chapter in this eternal history. In a corner of the world where heaven seemed infinite and the desert kept secrets of an unfathomable seniority, Horus, the son of Osiris and Isis, was born. But his arrival in the world was not a quiet celebration, it was an act of resistance, of hope in the midst of a tragedy that threatened to devour everything the gods had built. It all started with a brutal crime. Osiris, the just god and king of the world, was betrayed by his own brother, Set. Consumed by envy and the desire for power, Set cheated Osiris and locked him in a coffin, sealing his destiny with unsuspected cruelty. He threw the coffin into the Nile, where the waters took the king to the unknown. But Set did not stop there. He dismembered Osiris's body, spreading his parts throughout Egypt, as a final attempt to erase any trace of his brother. Isis, Osiris's devotee wife, did not give up. In his heart an unwavering determination burned, a love so strong that he even challenged death. With the help of his sister Nephthys and Anubis as guide, he toured every corner of the world, looking for the body of Osiris. His tears fell like rain on earth while pronouncing words of magic, rebuilding what had been destroyed. Finally, he managed to gather it and, with the power of his sorcery, he returned his life, although only for a brief moment. It was at that time of miracle and vulnerability that Horus was conceived. He was not any child, his birth was destined to change the fate of Egypt and avenge the injustice committed against his father. Isis, now mother and protector, took refuge in the marshes of the Nile Delta, hiding from the fury of Set, which sought to destroy the heir before he could grow. There, between the reeds and the calm waters, Isis raised Horus with love and care, teaching not only the arts of war, but also the importance of balance and justice. Horus's childhood was not easy. Set's threat was always present, and the tests were constant. At one point, Set sent a poisonous scorpion to kill him, but Isis, with his magic and ingenuity, saved his son. On another occasion, Horus fell seriously ill, and the despair of Isis was so great that the gods themselves intervened to save him. Each obstacle that faced Horus, forging in him the character of a leader, a warrior and, above all, a protector. When Horus reached maturity, he was no longer just the son of Osiris, it was his living legacy, a symbol of hope for all those who suffered under the chaos of Set. But before claiming his place as king, he had to face his uncle in a series of battles that would define the fate of the world. Each encounter between them was more than a clash of forces, it was a confrontation between order and chaos, between light and darkness. Horus didn't fight alone. Isis was by his side, a cunning strategist and a constant poyo. At a crucial moment, when Set tried to manipulate the divine laws to win the favor of the gods, Isis intervened, using their eloquence and wisdom to reveal the truth. But even among the allies, there were tensions. In an unexpected act, Isis showed compassion toward Set in a moment of vulnerability, which led Horus to question his loyalty. Despite this brief conflict, mother and son found a way to reconcile, understanding that their union was essential to succeed. In one of the most fierce battles, Horus lost his eye. It was a devastating blow, but also a transformation. His eye, healed and restored by Thoth's magic, became a symbol of healing and protection. The Ujat, as was known, not only represented Horus's victory, but also his sacrifice and his ability to overcome suffering. Finally, Horus prevailed. In a divine judgment, the gods declared that he, and not Set, was the legitimate heir of the throne of Egypt. With his victory, the order was restored, and Horus became the protector of the pharaohs, the eternal link between the human and the divine. But even in his triumph, Horus never forgot his mother's lessons or his father's sacrifice, whose teachings lived in each of his decisions. Horus's reign was not just about power, it was about justice, balance, and the constant struggle to keep chaos at bay. And although the world seemed to be at peace, there was always an echo, a reminder that Set, although defeated, never disappeared completely. The battle for balance was eternal, and Horus was prepared to fight every day for what his father had protected with his life. The air was dense, loaded with tension. The echo of a war cry echoed in the valleys, a call that broke the silence of the desert. Horus, with his fixed gaze and the hawk inscribed in his essence, knew that the moment had arrived. He would face Set, not only for revenge, but to restore the balance of the cosmos that had been broken by betrayal and chaos. This would not be an ordinary duel, it would be a battle that would resonate through the times, recorded in the memory of gods and mortals. Set, the god of chaos and the storm, waited with his imposing figure and his animal head, unmistakable and feared. It was the destroyer, the bearer of desolation, and had stolen the most precious of Horus, to his father, Osiris. But beyond the act of betrayal, Set represented something deeper, an inevitable force in the universe that challenged order and stability. Horus knew he didn't fight against a common enemy, faced the incarnation of the imbalance. The first confrontation between Horus and Set occurred in the waters of the Nile, a place as loaded with symbolism as the battle itself. The waves seemed to be divided between the light and the shadow, between the calm of the river and the turbulence that Set created with his fury. Horus, with the spear in hand and the wings of its divine essence deployed, threw himself into combat. For endless days and nights, both fought with a ferocity that shook the earth. The waters of the Nile, usually source of life, were dyed red while the two gods proved their strength and will. In a crucial moment, Set took the form of a great hippo, a symbol of his dominance over brute force and destruction. He roared with such intensity that the stars seemed to tremble, but Horus, determined and cunning, he found a way to hurt him. Every blow they exchanged was more than a physical movement, it was a confrontation of ideas and primordial forces. Order and chaos, life and destruction collided with an intensity that no mortal could fully understand. But the fight was not limited to the physical battlefield. In an attempt to dishonor Horus, Set resorted to deception and manipulation, trying to demonstrate his superiority in the divine courts. He claimed that he, and not Horus, was the legitimate ruler of Egypt. In the celestial court, chaired by the older gods, the disputes were as fierce as on the battlefield. Isis, Horus's mother, used her cunning to dismantle Set's lies, exposing him as the traitor he was. His ability to weave words with the same precision as enchantments was vital to strengthen the case of his son. The battle took an unexpected turn when Horus lost his eye during one of the most fierce clashes. The pain was immense, both physical and symbolic. His eye, the source of his vision and power, was taken by Set's violence. But Horus did not fall. With Thoth's help, the god of wisdom, his eye was restored, becoming even more powerful, the Ujat. This eye not only represented healing, but also the ability to see beyond suffering, to find clarity in the midst of chaos. The Ujat became an eternal symbol of protection and renewal. Finally, in a final battle that shook the cosmos, Horus managed to submit Set. His victory was not just physics, it was a triumph of order over chaos, justice over betrayal. The gods, gathered in the celestial court, told Horus the legitimate heir of the throne of Egypt. He was crowned as the protector of men, the link between mortals and gods, the guardian of cosmic stability. However, Set's defeat did not mean its destruction. The gods understood that chaos was an intrinsic part of the universe, necessary for balance to exist. Set was relegated to a different role, protecting Ra's solar boat during his night trip through the Duat, fighting the Apophis snake that tried to devour the sun. Thus, even in defeat, Set found a purpose, remembering everyone that chaos and order are two sides of the same currency. Horus, with his restored eye and his indomitable spirit, took his place as king of Egypt. But the scars of his struggle never faded at all. Every time he looked at the sky or walked among his people, he remembered the battle he had fought, not only for his father, but for the balance of all things. The world was still spinning, the stars continued to shine, and the Nile continued flowing, thanks to the sacrifice and determination of Horus. In the silence of the night, while the desert breathed calmly, the echo of the fight between Horus and Set remained in the air. It was a reminder that balance must always be defended, because chaos never disappears completely, always await the shadows, ready to challenge order once again. And in that eternal challenge, Horus, the divine hero, would remain vigilant. The sky of Egypt was dyed from a deep red when Horus appeared before the gods to claim what belonged to him, his father's throne, Osiris. It was not a simple act of succession, but the culmination of an epic struggle and fulfilled promise. Horus did not seek power by personal glory, but to restore order and protect the delicate balance that kept the world in harmony. The room where the gods gathered with a golden light, a reflection of the majesty of Ra, the solar god. There, in the celestial court, the older gods, headed by Thoth, Mat and Ra, sat down to deliberate. Before them was Horus, with the determination recorded on his face, and Set, who still tried to justify his right to the throne despite his acts of betrayal. The atmosphere was loaded, as if the universe itself contained breathing pending the verdict. Horus remained firm while the gods discussed. Inside, he felt the presence of his mother, Isis, who had been raised in secret, and his father, Osiris, whose essence still guided him. Every word he pronounced carried the weight of his sacrifice, each look was a reminder of the battles he had fought. And although the trial seemed endless, the truth was clear: Horus was the legitimate heir. Finally, the decisive moment came. Ra, the source of light and life, rose and proclaimed that Horus would rule on Egypt. The throne belonged to him, not only as the son of Osiris, but as a living symbol of order and justice. The gods cheered the decision, and the world seemed to breathe again. At that moment, Horus became more than a warrior, it became the protector of humanity, into the link between the earthly and the divine. The coronation ceremony was a spectacle worthy of a god. In the sacred temple of Heliopolis, Horus appeared with the double crown, a symbol of his sovereignty over the high and base Egypt. The Blanca headjet and the red debret joined, as a representation of the unit that Horus had promised to protect. Beside him, the priests recited ancient hymns, invoking the blessing of the gods for the new ruler. The crowds gathered in the surroundings, looking at the sky, knowing that Horus would not only lead them, but would protect them with their divine power. But Horus's role as king went beyond the rituals. His presence was not just symbolic, it was tangible in every corner of Egypt. As a protector of the pharaohs, Horus became the leadership model, guiding each human ruler who ascended to the throne. The pharaohs, considered children of Horus, carried their spirit and strength. In his crowns and arches the hawk was seen, a constant reminder that his duty was not only towards his people, but towards the cosmos itself. The Horus government was also full of symbolisms that connected the human and the divine. Every morning, when the sun rose, it was a reaffirmation of its victory over chaos, a reminder that the order prevailed. The temples dedicated to his name were more than places of worship, they were centers where harmony and stability were cultivated. Each pharaoh, as he ascended to the throne, performed rituals to join Horus, to be his representative on earth. This sacred link assured that Horus's legacy would never weaken, that his fight against chaos will continue in each generation. In each real decree, in each temple erected, the presence of Horus was felt, ensuring that Egypt remained a lighthouse in a world full of uncertainty. As Horus ruled from his divine throne, the waters of the Nile flowed calmly, the crops prospered, and the stars shone clearly in the sky. But even in the midst of that peace, there was always a murmur, a reminder that chaos was never completely defeated. Set, although defeated, continued his fight in the duat, ensuring that the sun was reborn every morning. Horus, aware of this, remained vigilant, knowing that his duty had no end. On the horizon, the sun descended slowly, painting the sky with gold and fire tones. For mortals, it was a simple sunset, but for Horus, it was a reminder that their fight and their reign were eternal. While chaos existed, he would be there, on the throne of Egypt, protecting the balance with the strength and wisdom of a true god. The wind blew gently on the marshes of the Nile Delta, where nature seemed to protect a sacred secret. Among the reeds, Isis kept their child in my arms, cradling it with a mixture of love and an almost fierce determination. This child was not any child, it was Harpocrates, Horus El Nino, the heir of a divine lineage marked by sacrifice and destiny. His fragility was a mirage, because in his little body the power of a god intended to change the course of history. The image of Harpocrates, with his index finger on his lips and an innocent expression, seemed to suggest silence. But it wasn't just silence, it was a symbol of divine protection, the secret that Isis should keep to keep it safe from Set. In his childhood, Horus was hidden from the world, like a seed that grows in the dark before emerging strongly. Every day was a battle against the danger that stalked. Set, relentless, sent constant threats, from poisonous animals to supernatural storms, but Isis, with its magic and cunning, always found a way to protect your child. Harpocrates was not just a divine child, it also represented the promise of renewal, the hope that even after chaos and destruction, life could be reborn. In his child's form, Horus was the essence of purity, the initial spark that contained the potential to become something bigger. But that purity did not mean weakness. Harpocrates was strong in his innocence, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was a light that could not be extinguished. As he grew up, Horus began to transform, leaving behind his childhood to become a warrior. But this was not a simple physical transition, it was a spiritual metamorphosis. From Harpocrates, the boy who needed protection, Horus the old man emerged, the majestic falcon who dominated the heavens. At this stage, Horus was no longer the protected, it was the protector. He was no longer hiding from Set, he faced him directly, with the strength and value of a mature god. Horus the old embodied power and wisdom. It was the god of heaven, with his eyes representing the sun and the moon, watching both the day and night. In his mature form, he was seen with the double crown of Egypt, joining the high and base Egypt under his authority. But what distinguished Horus the old man was not only his strength, but his ability to balance. He understood that power without justice was destructive, and that wisdom without action was useless. Every decision he made was impregnated with the experience of a god who had seen chaos and had fought for order. The contrast between Harpocrates and Horus the old man was not a contradiction, it was a cycle. Horus's childhood was not only a prologue, but a base on which its greatness was built. The innocent child who had learned to resist the dangers of the world grew to become the protector of that same world. And although his adult form was the best known and reverenced, his essence as Harpocrates never disappeared, it was completely. He always carried an echo of that innocence, a reminder that even the most powerful warrior had begun as a vulnerable being. In the temples and in the stories, these two facets of Horus were celebrated as a whole. Harpocrates was invoked by mothers and children, a symbol of protection and hope in times of uncertainty. Meanwhile, Horus the old man was worshipped as the defender of order and balance, the god who ensured the stability of the world. Together, they represented the eternal cycle of life, birth, growth, struggle and renewal. The sun began to wear on the lands of Egypt, and the shadows of the desert lengthened. On the horizon, a hawk flew with majesty, its silhouette cutting the sky. It was Horus, the god who had been a child and had become Guerrero, the eternal protector who remembered the world that even in his most difficult moments, there was a force that would never abandon them. Between the child and the old man, between Harpocrates and the falcon, he lived the story of a god whose essence transcended time, joining generations with his unwavering presence. From the first moments of creation, the sun illuminated the primary chaos. Ra, the god of the sun and life, was not only the source of light, but the very principle of existence. When the universe emerged from the waters of the Nun, the darkness of chaos began to dissipate, and with the first ray of light, Ra rose on the horizon, bringing with him the power of creation. From that moment, his role in the Egyptian cosmogony was unquestionable. He was the creator, the support, the beginning and the end. The image of Ra, with its solar crown and the album that shone with blinding force, was a symbol of omnipotence. Every day, when the sun rose in heaven, it was a representation of its power. Ra not only ruled the sky, but was also the god who toured the duat, the underworld, to be reborn every night. In the world of gods and mortals, he was the patron of life, the one that brought light to earth and maintained universal order. Ra was not only the god of the sun in his physical appearance, but also a cosmic principle. In the Egyptian cosmogony, it was the heart of the universe, the principle of everything that existed. His power was so vast that he not only affected the material world, but also transcended the heavens and the seas, influencing the stars and currents. When Ra got up at dawn, the horizon itself seemed to leave in two, and the first glow in the morning was seen as the return of creation, the restoration of order, which had been established at the time of creation. Every day, Ra was traveling through the sky in his solar boat, the Mandajate, accompanied by other gods and spirits that protected him and assisted in his journey. As the sun slipped through the sky, it was said that Ra was transformed, through different forms and states. From dawn, when he was young and vigorous, until noon, where he reached its peak of power, and finally at the afternoon, when his trip to the underworld began. The solar boat crossed the heavens, while it was guided its light throughout the day, and then immersed in the darkness of the duat, where it had to face the Apophis snake, the manifestation of chaos and destruction. This journey from the sun to the duat and its return to dawn not only represented the cycle of the day, but also the eternal cycle of life, death, and resurrection. The Egyptians saw in Ra a figure that guaranteed the continuity of the world. Without its light, the earth would fall into darkness and chaos, and life itself would extinguish. Therefore, Ra worship was so crucial. It was not simply an act of reverence towards a god, but a necessity for the survival of Egypt and everything that inhabited him. Ra also had a deep connection with the pharaoh. This, considered the son of Ra, ruled as his representative on earth, and his power was legitimate only thanks to the blessing of the solar god. Each pharaoh carried the mission of maintaining order in the world, imitating Ra's journey on their daily trip, facing challenges to restore peace and justice. For this reason, the celebrations in honor of Ra were common, especially during the winter solstice, when the renaissance of the sun was celebrated, the return of light after the darkest days of the year. But it was not an easy god to approach. It was so powerful that, in its full form, its energy could consume mortals. However, it was said that Ra had been divided into several aspects to facilitate their interaction with humans. Sometimes he manifested himself as Atum, the creative god, or as Khepri, the god of dawn, who represented the rising sun. In these aspects, Ra could be more accessible and participate directly in humans, guiding them and protecting them. But deep down, Ra Esegia being an unfathomable figure, a being that overflowed human understanding. Only pharaohs and priests of the most sacred temples could approach enough to receive their direct blessing. Ra was the god who lived in heaven, but also influenced earth. His solar boat sailed through the cosmos, carrying with him the light of wisdom, justice, and harmony. The Egyptian cosmogony was dominated by the figure of Ra because he represented not only the vitality of the sun, but also the principle of creation itself. Without its light, there would be no life; without its heat, there would be no growth. Each dawning was a reaffirmation of its dominance over the universe, a reminder that, even in the darkest moments, the light would always return, bringing hope and renewal. The sunlight died slowly on the horizon, immersing the world in a mysterious penumbra. But in the firmament, the god Ra began his night crossing, his solar boat furrowing the dark waters of the duat, the Egyptian underworld, where the sun had to cross the darkness to be reborn at dawn. It was a journey loaded with symbolism and danger, where every night Ra faced its most arduous struggle, and with it, it guaranteed the continuity of life on Earth. The solar ship, known as the Mandajate, furrowed the waters of the duat under the guide of Ra, leading to God and a divine crew that assisted him in his day. The ship was not only a means of transport, but a sacred boat, designed to face the terrors of darkness. Inside, Ra was in its most powerful, but also vulnerable form. The journey was not only a physical route, but a cosmic battle in which the fate of the universe hung from a thread. To each sun's turn towards the night, the trip to the other world began. Ra, with its solar crown, shining weakly in the dark, faced chaos represented by Apophis, the snake of chaos and destruction. Apophis was Ra's primary enemy, the creature that fought against light and life. This cosmic, gigantic and dark snake like the night, stalked constantly in the depths of the duat, seeking to destroy the solar boat and submerge the universe in eternal darkness. The fate of the world depended on this fight every night. If Apophis won, chaos would prevail and creation would collapse. Every night, Apophis launched its attack against Ra, winding through the dark waters and surrounding the solar boat. The struggle between the snake and the solar god was fierce. Ra, despite his divine power, could not face this threat only.
Of lig het aan te arts had aan aardtaat kuldril evente denses tsados.
He needed the help of the minor gods who formed their crew, deities like Thoth, the god of wisdom, and Ma'at, the goddess of truth and order, who helped maintain balance. Together, they struggled to keep Apophis at bay, rejecting each of their attempts to destroy the light. The Egyptians imagined that, during this trip, the duat waters were dark, full of evil monsters and spirits, which represented chaos forces. But beyond physical threats, there was a deep concept behind this struggle. Ra faced not only Apophis, but also the internal darkness that represents fear, destruction, and oblivion. Each night, Ra died symbolically in the waters of duat, but his fight guaranteed that the next day, the sunlight would shine again. The battle represented the eternal struggle between light and shadows, creation and destruction, order and chaos. On his night crossing, Ra passed through several places in the duat, each with his own dangers. The trip was not linear, but full of turns and challenges. In one of the most feared passages, Ra had to face total darkness, a place where even the sunlight could not penetrate. Here, his power looked constantly put to the test. But as it advanced, the divine crew fought tirelessly, pronouncing enchantments and prayers to keep evil spirits away and restore balance. The connection between Ra and his followers was stronger than any threat, because they represented the link between the divine and the human, protecting the order of the world. The culminating moment of the trip occurred when Apophis, having stalked and attacked for hours, tried to devour the solar boat completely. At this point, Ra immersed himself in the most direct struggle. Sometimes, the battle seemed lost, but there was always a spark of hope, the intervention of the gods, and the power of Ra. In the most dramatic story of Egyptian mythology, Ra was helped by his son, Horus, who assisted him in the fight against Apophis. Together, they released the solar boat from the snake claws and brought it back to the light. Finally, after endless struggle hours, the solar boat managed to escape from Apis' claws. Ophis. The chaos snake fell defeated once again, but the price of the battle was high. Ra, exhausted and dying, passed through the last phases of his night trip. But his strength was never completely exhausted. The gods restored their power, and at dawn, Rivia. Like the sun that reappears after a night of darkness, Ra got up again, brighter and stronger than before. The life cycle continued, and order was restored. At that precise moment, when the first ray of sun touched the earth, the Egyptians celebrated the victory of Ra. It was a rebirth not only of the sun, but of the entire world. The fight that had fought in the duat's dark waters represented the internal battle of each human being, between light and darkness, between hope and despair. Ra was not only the god of the sun, but the symbol of persistence, the power of light that never goes out, regardless of how terrifying it is darkness. And so, every dawn, the Egyptians knew that, although the shadows were lengthened and the chaos stalking, it would always be there, fighting for life, by order, for renewal. Ra, the god of the sun, stands as a central figure in Egyptian mythology, but its history is not written alone. Throughout the vast mythological tapestry of Egypt, Ra interacts with other gods, forging complex links, facing challenges and performing crucial roles in the destiny of other divine beings. Among its closest relationships are the gods Osiris, Isis, and a series of other deities that form a network of cooperation, conflict and cosmic balance. The link between Ra and Osiris is particularly relevant, since, despite its relative difference in the pantheon, both are intrinsically connected through life and death. Ra, as the creative and giver of life, granted the existence to Osiris, who was seen as the god of resurrection and fertility. Together, they represented two opposite but complementary forces. Ra symbolized light, sun, and vitality in its purest form, while Osiris was associated with death and renewal. Ra was not only the creator of life, but also the person in charge of the continuity of the stations, which also directly touch the cycle of death and the regeneration that Osiris ruled. Throughout the legends, Ra not only acts as the deity that sustains life, but also as the judge and protector who watches over cosmic justice. Its relationship with Osiris is reflected more complex when the issues of death and underworld are addressed. When Osiris is killed by his brother Set, Ra is not indifferent to the suffering of the divine family. Although his role as a solar god links him more to the world of the living, he cannot remain oblivious to the tragedy that affects the balance of all Egypt. It is in this context that Ra plays a decisive role in the destiny of Osiris, going to join Isis and Horus to ensure revenge and restoration of cosmic harmony. Isis, Osiris's wife and the protective mother, is another of the gods with whom Ra has a significant interaction. The connection between Ra-Eis goes beyond the relationship she maintains with Osiris. Isis is a cunning goddess, wise and full of power, who also understands that his ability to protect his family and restore order in the cosmos depends on his ability to manipulate the same powers that Ra controls. In many traditions, Isis is described as a goddess who possesses the secrets of the universe, even those who keep jealously. A fascinating story tells how Isis, seeking to obtain the secret powers of Ra to cure his son Horus, creates a poisonous snake that bites the solar god. Wounded by the bite, Ra is forced to reveal to Isis his true name, an act of great importance, since the name of a god in Egyptian mythology is a reflection of its essence. Through this exchange, Isis gains knowledge that allows you to have deeper control over cosmic forces, reflecting the tension between prohibited knowledge and divine power that jealously custody. Although Ra is considered the supreme god and the king of the gods, their relationship with Isis and Osiris shows that even the most powerful divine beings are not infallible or lonely. Each, in its function within the pantheon, depends on others to maintain the balance of the world. While Ra provides light and life, Osiris ensures the cycle of death and rebirth, and Isis intervenes as the protective mother and the carrier of hidden knowledge. Ra, on the other hand, maintains the stability of the universe, making sure that everything follows its correct course, regardless of tragedies or conflicts that may arise. This system of interactions between the gods reflects the intricate network of influences that determine the fate of Egypto. Although Ra is the creator and the god of the sun, he cannot govern alone. You need to Osiris to guarantee resurrection and fertility, and Isis for the protection and preservation of cosmic balance. Together, these gods not only govern the world of humans, but also maintain the stability of the universe, each with their own powers, but always interrelated. On the other hand, Ra's relationship with other minor gods is also key. His interaction with Thoth, the god of wisdom and knowledge, is fundamental, especially in the context of divine judgment. Thoth, together with Ma'at, the goddess of truth and order, plays a crucial role in the restoration of cosmic balance, working hand in hand to ensure that the universe does not fall apart under the weight of chaos. The constant cooperation and struggle between light and darkness, order and chaos, is a narrative that is repeated again and again in the stories of the Egyptian pantheon, and it remains as the epic enter of all this divine drama. In the end, Ra, although he is the god of the sun and life, he is not an isolated god. His power and influence are amplified by the relationships he maintains with the other gods. Through these interactions, the world of the Egyptian gods becomes a network of connections that ensures the cosmic order and well-being of Egypt. Ra, as the father of life and protector of the universal order, continues to be a fundamental figure in mythology, whose role is complemented and enriched with the gods that surround it. In the vast extension of the Egyptian desert, where the dunes seemed to devour everything in their path, a dark myth emerged, a story that would mark a before and after in the relationship between the gods and men. Ra, the supreme god of the sun, whose light had guided the Egyptians since the dawn of time, reached a critical moment in his reign. His immense power, which had maintained order and life in the world during eons, began to be challenged. This story begins with a growing dissatisfaction of humanity, a restlessness that slowly became rebellion. Humanity, which had been created by Ra and was under its protection, began to perceive its domain as a burden. The shadows of discontent extended through the cities and fields of Egypt, such as fog before a dawn. Ra, although he still had sunlight, felt that his power over mortals began to weaken. The people, tired of his authority, of the strict laws he represented, began to challenge him, questioning his right to govern. Ra, seeing how his influence crumbled among men, retired to his temple, plunged into loneliness and despair. In that moment of weakness, a group of mortals, led by the rebellion of humans, openly challenged Ra's power. Somehow, they believed they could live without the constant look of the solar god, that they could prosper without their light. His challenge was blasphemy, a cry of independence that resonated throughout Egypt, reaching the heart of the divine kingdom. For Ra, this was a painful blow. The solar god, given the betrayal of those whom he had given life, began to contemplate the end of his reign. But it was not a god who gave up easily. In a start of fury and despair, he decided to punish humanity for his insolence. To carry out his revenge, Ra appealed to one of his most fearsome and powerful instruments, Sekhmet, the goddess lion of war and destruction. Sekhmet, daughter of Ra and goddess of war, was the personification of divine anger, the furious face of justice that did not fear destroying everything in her path. Ra called her, knowing that she was her last resort, her final response to the rebellion of humanity. Ra ordered Sekhmet to come out and punish men who had dared to challenge their will. The goddess, furious and unleashed, began to tour the world, unleashing her fury. His roar resonated in every corner of Egypt, and wherever he passed, men fell at their feet, devoured by their uncontrollable anger. The fields were filled with corpses, the cities were desolate. Humanity, terrified by Sekhmet's ferocity, had no way to defend against his anger. It was an invincible goddess, a primary force that represented the absolute power of Ra. But what began as a punishment quickly became a threat to the same balance of the world. Sekhmet's thirst for blood seemed endless. The goddess, blinded by her fury, did not stop killing, and soon, Egypt entirely began to empty life. The gods, fearful that the destruction of humanity could end the world as they knew it, asked to put an end to the massacre. The goddess, in her fury, had stopped distinguishing between the innocent and the culprits, and her thirst for revenge was taking the balance of El Cosmos. Ra, realizing that he had unleashed something he could not control, devised a plan to stop his daughter before destruction was total. What happened next in Egyptian mythology is a moment full of tension and symbolism. Ra, seeking to stop Sekhmet's wrath, ordered that special concoction be offered, a colored wine with red, to deceive and calm it. This wine, which looked like human blood, was poured on the path of Sekhmet. Seeing her, the goddess, blinded by her thirst for destruction, drank the liquid without hesitation, believing that it was fresh blood. But, by ingesting it, Sekhmet drank, and his rage vanished. The fury he had unleashed about Egypt was appeased, and the goddess, already satisfied and calm, retired, returning the order to the world. This myth not only speaks of Ra justice, but also of its vulnerability. Although Ra was an immense and powerful god, humanity's attempt to rebel against him showed that even the gods could be challenged. Ra, in the end, had to resort to an act of wisdom and cunning to restore balance, instead of just imposing its strength. Sekhmet's creation as an instrument of punishment not only underlines anger and divine justice, but also highlights the danger that the gods face when their power is questioned. The myth of human rebellion and the creation of Sekhmet became one of the most powerful stories of Egyptian mythology, reminding of the Egyptians the thin line between life and death, between order and chaos. Humanity, by rebelling against Ra, had almost brought with them the end of the world. But, at the same time, the punishment imposed by Sekhmet showed that even the gods could be overwhelmed by the forces they had created. Sekhmet's history and Ra's intervention revealed a universal truth: the divine power, although immense, is also subject to the limits of reason, and the balance of the world, although apparently unwavering, depends on a delicate order that, in a moment of fury, it can crumble. The darkness of the grave was dense, almost palpable, as if the air itself was impregnated with the stillness of death. But in that space, where time seemed to stop, Anubis was present, vigilant, like the guardian of a kingdom where the living and the dead were on the edge of the transition. The god of the dead, with his figure as a man and head of the jackal, represented the balance between the two worlds, that of the living and that of the dead, which crossed the sacred line that divided the existence of non-existence. Anubis was not only a god, he was the protector of the necropolis, in charge of ensuring that the trip of the soul was safe and fair. The mummification ritual was one of the most sacred moments and, at the same time, feared in the cycle of life and death of the Egyptians. Anubis was not just a god who hoped patiently in the tombs, but his essence was merged with the very steps of the funeral rituals. When a loved one died, the Egyptians not only thought about their departure, but also the need to ensure a good trip to the beyond, through the careful preparation of their body. The mummification was a complex and sacred process, and Anubis, with his protective gaze, was there at each stage. As a pattern of the embaliers, it guided the priests who worked tirelessly to preserve the essence of the deceased, ensuring that the person's meat and bones were not corrupted and could be preserved for eternal life. The rituals were long and meticulous, full of symbols and enchantments. Anubis was present in each of them, either at the time the body was cleaned, stripped of its organs, or when the treatment with resins and bandages was performed. But beyond its function as a protector of funeral rituals, Anubis had a much deeper responsibility. It was the guide that accompanied the soul through the trip to the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. Once the body was prepared, Anubis was guided the loved ones from the deceased to the room of the trials, where the soul had to face Osiris's dreaded judgment. In that crucial trial, Anubis played an essential role. While the heart of the deceased was placed on a balance, balanced against Ma'at's pen, the goddess of truth and justice, Anubis was in charge of observing. Not only was the guardian of the weighing of the heart, but also the witness of the purity of the soul. In the courtroom, the god of the dead maintained his vigilant attitude, with his solemn bearing, to ensure that the process was carried out with the strictest justice. If the heart of the deceased was balanced with the pen, the soul was considered pure and could follow its path to the Egyptian paradise, the fields of Yaru, where it would live forever. But if the heart was heavier than the pen, marked by the sins of life, the soul would face its perdition, being devoured by Amit, the beast with crocodile body, lion, and hippopotamus. Anubis not only had the responsibility of guarding the process, it was also the incarnation of protection. The ancient Egyptians thought that, thanks to their presence, the deceased soul was safe from the demons of the underworld, who could divert her or corrupt her on her trip. The mummification rituals were, in many ways, a way to ensure that the soul was equipped to face those dangers. In each sentence, in each incense on, in each pronounced blessing, Anubis manifested himself as an undisputed protector, ensuring that the deceased was ready to face the darkness and the Duat monsters without getting lost in the abyss. The link between Anubis and death was so deep that his role extended beyond the funeral rituals. In many cases, the Egyptians prayed to Anubis not only to protect the dead, but also to receive their favor. It was believed that Anubis could intervene in moments of despair, offering comfort and protection to those who faced death, or even those who feared that their loved ones could not be prepared for their trip. In this sense, Anubis was not a distant god, but an intimate deity with the Egyptian people, someone whom they could invoke in times of need, to ask for help, guidance and, of course, protection. The Egyptian necropolis, those vast cities of the dead, were sacred places that Anubis watched closely. It was said that he walked between the tombs, guarding the souls that rested inside. Each grave was an extension of God himself, a sanctuary where contact with the hereafter became tangible. The pharaohs, those chosen by the gods, were the most venerated in these places. His tombs were more than simple burials, they were portals towards eternity. In these tombs, Anubis was invoked as a protective god, and his presence was considered fundamental to ensure that the king would travel successfully to the other world, where he would continue to rule as a god. In this way, Anubis not only represented death, but also the transition. Death was not seen as an end, but as a step towards a new form of existence, a form beyond the physical. And in that step, Anubis was the guide light, the protector of the souls that entered into the hereafter. Through his constant gaze, through his rituals and his symbolism, Anubis offered the Egyptians an opportunity to transcend, to be remembered and live in eternity. The room was full of a solemn silence, a silence that weighed as much as the souls who expected their destiny. In the center, a great balance rose, imposing, with its dishes hanging as if they were the last border between salvation and oblivion. This was the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, where the souls of the dead were taken to face the most transcendental trial of their existence. There, under the vigilant look of Osiris, the king of the underworld, and with Anubis as custodian of the ceremony, the heart weighing was carried out. The heart, according to Egyptian beliefs, was the seat of thoughts, feelings, and acts. There was no sin, no virtuous act, no doubt or passion that would not be recorded in it. Therefore, it was this organ, and not another, that had to face the pen of Ma'at, the goddess of truth, order, and justice. This pen, light as the wind, was the symbol of purity, the cosmic balance that should be maintained at all costs. Anubis, with his high and majestic figure, was next to the balance, moving calmly and precision. His jackal head, always alert, seemed able to read the deepest emotions of each soul that was presented. In his hands, he held the heart of the deceased, just extracted from the body preserved through the sacred art of mummification. His touch was not cold or distant, it was respectful, almost reverent, as if it understood the weight of what was about to happen. Be careful, he placed his heart on one of the sources of the balance, while in the other the Ma'at pen, bright and delicate, almost like float, was deposited. Souls watched with fear, but also with hope. This was the decisive moment. If the heart was lighter or lighter in weight to the pen, it meant that the soul had lived in balance with the principles of Ma'at. The deceased was declared pure and fair, and was allowed to enter the fields of Yaru, a paradise where he would enjoy an eternal existence, surrounded by abundance and peace. But if the heart was heavier, full of sins and deviations, the soul was condemned. There, in the gloom of the trial room, Amit expected, the devour prey of souls. With his body composed of the most fearsome parts of a crocodile, a lion, and a hippo, Amit embodied absolute destruction. His task was simple and terrifying, devouring the hearts of those who did not exceed the test, condemning them to an eternal oblivion. The souls that fell in their jaws not only disappeared physically, but were erased from the eternal cycle of renaissance. There would be no memory, echo, or opportunity for redemption. Osiris, sitting on his throne made of reeds and surrounded by an aura of majesty, presided over the trial. Although his face was serene, his presence imposed. With his green skin, symbol of life and regeneration, and the scepter and the scourge in his hands, Osiris was the supreme judge. His gaze seemed to cross every heart that appeared before him, as if he could see directly in the depths of his essence. While the weighing was carried out, the divine scribes also had their place in the process. Thoth, the god of wisdom, with the head of Ibis, was in charge of registering the result. Every word he wrote was final, his calamus drawn the fate of souls with the precision of who knows that his writing has the power to decide between eternal life and disappearance. The moment of balance was tense, almost unbearable. The souls watched how the balance ranged, how the dish with the heart lowered or climbed slightly, approaching or moving away from the pen. It was a test that did not admit lies or deceptions. No act could be hidden, no disguised intention. Anubis' balance was fair and implacable, and each movement seemed to have the weight of the cosmos itself. If the soul managed to overcome the test, the feeling of relief was indescribable. Anubis, in that case, withdrew the heart of the balance and, with a slight head inclination, delivered to the deceased the confirmation that his trip would continue. The fields of Yaru expected, a place where the spirits could work their eternal lands, surrounded by the waters of the celestial Nile and a light that was not from the sun, but of the divinity itself. But if the heart failed, if the dish fell with a weight that should not be there, Anubis turned his gaze to Amit. The monster, always expectant, advanced with a mixture of hunger and authority. With a single and fierce movement, he devoured his heart, and with him, everything that was once the deceased. At that moment, the room seemed to sink into an even deeper silence, a reminder that even in death, the balance should be respected. Osiris's trial and Anubis' balance were not just a symbolic act, they were the culmination of the philosophy of life of the Egyptians. Living in harmony with Ma'at, being fair, respecting the laws of the universe, these were not simple aspirations, but commandments to ensure an eternal destiny. And Anubis, with his imposing presence and his role as guardian, was in charge of maintaining that delicate balance, ensuring that each soul faced the destiny he really deserved. The gloom of the Egyptian night was dyed by a mantle of stars that seemed to monitor from the heavens. For the ancient Egyptians, these stars were not just distant lights, they were the eyes of the gods, observing, protecting and guiding. And among all the symbols of protection and divine vision, Anubis' eyes rose as an emblem of spiritual power and eternal connection with the sacred. Mysterious, vigilant, and loaded with meaning, Anubis' eyes were deeply intertwined with the mysticism of Horus's eye, creating a symbolic network that spoke of protection, restoration, and the endless cycle of life and death. Anubis, the jackal god, was more than a guardian of the dead. His eyes, intense and deep, were described as headlights in the darkness of the underworld. With them, he not only observed the souls that crossed towards the duat, but also offered a spiritual protection that transcended the barrier between the worlds. These eyes, often represented in amulets and funeral reliefs, were considered carriers of an unmatched protective power. It was said that his gaze could move the chaos, disperse the darkness, and keep the demons from beyond. But Anubis's eyes did not exist in isolation. They were intrinsically linked to the eye of Horus, known as Ujat, a symbol that represented healing, protection, and fullness. The legend of Horus's eye was a central myth in Egyptian mythology. According to this story, Horus lost one of his eyes during his fierce battle with Set, the god of chaos. However, thanks to the power of magic and divine intervention, the eye was restored by Thoth, the god of wisdom. This restoration made Ujat a symbol of recovery, balance, and protection against all evil. The connection between Anubis and the Ujat resided in its common essence as guardians. Anubis, with its guide and protective role, shared the responsibility of ensuring that souls achieved eternity without being disturbed. Like Horus's eye, Anubis's eyes were a spiritual shield, a reminder that even in the darkest moments there was a divine light watching and protecting. Amulets with the shape of Anubis's eyes and the Ujat were common among the ancient Egyptians. They were placed next to the mummies, embedded in the bandages, or as part of the funeral ornaments. These amulets were not simple decorative objects, they were tangible manifestations of unwavering faith in the protective power of Anubis. The Egyptians believed that these eyes had the ability to keep the deceased safe from the dangers of the duat, allowing him to cross the unknown landscapes of the underworld without fear. In addition, these symbols were also used by the living, such as pendants or talismans, to invoke the protection of the jackal god in the earthly world. Anubis's eye symbolism went beyond simple protection. In them there was also a message about constant surveillance. The Egyptians knew that Anubis not only watched the dead, but also the living. His eyes were a reminder that every action had a weight, that every decision was recorded in the person's heart, and that, in the end, all souls would face the trial. That omnipresence of Anubis, symbolized in his eyes, was both comforting and terrifying, a reminder that there was no way to escape the cosmic order of Ma'at. The funeral rituals reflected this connection between Anubis and the Ujat. When a priest officiated the mummification, he often carried masks with the shape of Anubis's head. While working to preserve the body of the deceased, the priest embodied the god's god, acting as his eyes and his hands in the physical world. This act not only ensured the preservation of the body, but also symbolized the transfer of divine surveillance to the preparation process for the hereafter. In the heart of Egyptian mythology, Anubis's eyes were more than a symbol, they were a promise. They promised that no soul would be alone, that even in the darkest moments there would be a divine presence observing and guiding. They were a link between the living and the dead, between the earthly and the eternal. Like the Ujat, Anubis's eyes represented restoration and hope, reminding everyone that, although the road could be uncertain, there would always be light for those who lived with justice and respect for the cosmic balance. In the tombs and in the temples, in the amulets and in the stories, Anubis's eyes remain immortalized as a testimony of the Egyptian faith in the power of the divine order. Through them, the ancients not only sought protection, but also a deep connection with the sacred, a bond that assured them that death was not the end, but a step towards a more complete existence, where Anubis's eyes would continue to watch. The sands of Egypt, under the eternal sun that observes everything, hide stories that time has not completely erased. While Anubis is mainly known as the protector of the necropolis and the guide of souls towards the final judgment, his figure is also interwoven in smaller stories, but no less intriguing. They are the legends that whisper the winds between the ruins, the stories that do not appear in the great inscriptions, but that were transmitted from mouth to mouth, molding the perception of the jackal god over the centuries. One of these stories tells how Anubis, in his eternal surveillance of the duat, found a soul that had escaped from the balance of justice. It was the spirit of an ambitious man who, in life, had accumulated wealth deceiving his community and who, in death, sought to avoid the trial hiding in the shadows of the underworld. Anubis, with his sharp smell and his gaze that penetrated the darkness, soon found him. According to legend, God did not lead him directly to the trial, but forced him to walk next to him, visiting the darkest corners of the duat, showing him the consequences of his acts. The man, faced with the torments of the condemned souls and the images of the lives he had ruined, began to understand the weight of his evil. At the end of the tour, Anubis led him to Osiris, but not as a simple defendant. The man, full of repentance, offered his heart to judgment with an honesty that he had not had in life. This story, although less, was a teaching on the inevitability of divine justice and the possibility of redemption even in the threshold of oblivion. Another curious story talks about Anubis' relationship with the animals that inhabited the desert. It is said that on one occasion, while watching a grave desecrated by thieves, Anubis adopted the shape of a jackal to confuse them. The thieves, seeing the animal, they considered it a simple scavenger and did not pay attention to their movements. But when they tried to flee with the stolen treasures, Anubis pursued them tirelessly, blocking their paths and creating sandstorms that forced them to return to the tomb. When the thieves finally returned everything they had taken, Anubis, in their divine form, appeared before them. According to legend, he did not punish them with death, but condemned them to serve as guardians of the tomb until the end of their days, thus learning the true meaning of respect for the dead. In the villages close to the Nile, there was a belief among the mothers that attributed to Anubis a protective role towards young children. They said that, during the darkest nights, when fear of evil was more intense, they could feel the presence of Anubis taking care of their homes. Some even claimed to listen to a soft howl in the distance, interpreted as a sign that the jackal god was driving away the evil forces. This connection with the protection of the vulnerable made the amulets with their image were popular not only in tombs, but also in the homes of the living. With the passage of time, as Egyptian culture interacted with other civilizations, stories about Anubis began to evolve. In the Greco-Roman period, attributes were associated that he did not have, mixing his figure with that of Hermes in the form of Anubis, a god who symbolized the fusion of traditions and the bridge between cultures. This new image presented it as a messenger between the worlds, not only that of the living and the dead, but also that of different beliefs. A late legend of this era speaks of how Anubis, in her Anubis form, helped a Greek merchant lost in the desert. The man, caught in a sandstorm, invoked the Egyptian and Greek gods, desperately looking for help. Anubis, moved by his sincere supplication, appeared as a figure that combined elements of both cultures, his shore head and his Greek-style robe. With his guide, the merchant found an oasis and survived, returning to his land with a respect renewed by the Egyptian divinities. These minor stories, although less known, show a different side of Anubis, one that humanizes him and brings him closer to common people. Far from being just the austere god of judgment and mummification, he was also seen as a protector, a teacher and, sometimes, even a guide for the living. These legends, in their simplicity, reminded the ancient Egyptians that the gods were not unattainable, but were deeply involved in each aspect of existence, from the most solemn rituals to the most everyday moments. The desert roared with a relentless wind, as if the grains of sand were carriers of an ancient and unfathomable fury. In the midst of that chaos, the ancient Egyptians saw the figure of Set, the god of disorder, storm and violence, but also of courage and protection. In its essence, Set was a living paradox, a god whose nature embodied both destruction and defense. His duality made him feared and revered in equal parts, an indomitable force that even the gods could ignore. Set, with his head of an unknown animal and his muscular body, was the god of inhospitable places. The desert, with its endless dunes and their treacherous storms, was its domain. It was the antithesis of the fertile valley of the Nile, and therefore, it represented the chaos that constantly threatened the order established by Ma'at. But even within this association with disorder, Set was not a purely evil figure. He was also Ra's protector, the solar god, during his dangerous night trip through the Duat. While Ra was sailing in his solar boat, it was Set who faced the Apophis snake, the primary chaos monster that tried to devour the sun and plunge the world in eternal darkness. In those nocturnal battles, Set became the coat of the cosmos. With his spear in hand, he faced Apophis with an incomparable ferocity. The snake was immense, his body filled the horizon, and his presence alone made the heavens tremble. But Set, with its brute force and its unwavering courage, managed to keep it at bay, allowing the sun to be reborn every morning. This act, heroic and essential for the continuity, but Horus was not an easy enemy to win, and his clashes extended for years, wearing both gods and dividing the followers of each one. However, the Set figure cannot be understood only from the perspective of their actions against Osiris and Horus. In many regions of Egypt, especially those close to the desert, Set was venerated as a protective god, especially in military contexts. His indomitable nature and his association with brute force made him the ideal pattern for warriors who face danger in the margins of the empire. For these peoples, Set was not a villain, but a powerful defender against external forces that threatened their safety. This ambivalence is also reflected in its role in late Egyptian mythology. In certain stories, Set is partially redeemed, presenting itself as a necessary ally in the fight against chaos. Although it never loses its violent and unpredictable character, it is recognized that its strength is essential to maintain universal balance. It is a figure that acts outside the established norms, but sometimes plays a crucial role to preserve order. The contradiction in the nature of Set is a lesson about the complexity of the world, according to the Egyptians. Not everything that seems destructive is entirely evil, and not everything that seems protective is shadow-free. Set, in its duality, represents the chaos that can be creative and the disorder that may be necessary to renew the balance. It is a force that cannot be contained or ignored, and that, in its most heroic moments, it ensures that the sun continues to shine on the horizon. Through its multiple facets, Set becomes a mirror of the opposite forces that inhabit all of us, the struggle between disorder and balance, fury and courage, selfishness and sacrifice. In him, the ancient Egyptians saw not only a god, but a manifestation of the tensions inherent in the cosmos, a reminder that even chaos has a place in the order of the universe. The Nile River ran calmly, reflecting the sky as a mirror, oblivious to the drama that was created among the gods. In the middle of the fertile lands, under the heat of the eternal sun, a betrayal was developed that would change forever the balance of the universe. Set, the god of chaos and storms, planned an act that would not only shake the heavens, but to mark the fate of humanity, the death of Osiris, his brother. Osiris was loved by all. As god of vegetation and renewal, his reign brought prosperity to the Nile Valley. He taught humans to cultivate, build civilizations, and live in harmony under the principle of Ma'at, the universal balance. But this admiration and success planted an envy seed in the heart of Set, who looked disdain how his brother enjoyed the worship of gods and mortals equally. Set, in its cunning, did not attack directly. He knew that brute force was not enough to defeat Osiris, because he was not only powerful, but also fair and dear. So he urged a plan that combined deception and cruelty. During a banquet in honor of Osiris, Set presented a seemingly innocent gift, a beautiful sarcophagus, carved with the greatest skill and decorated with gold and precious stones. But there was something else. The sarcophagus had been designed to perfectly adjust to Osiris's measures, as if it were a custom-made suit. The guests, fascinated by the work, began to try if they fit inside, one by one, in a game that seemed fun. But when Osiris lay on the sarcophagus, Set and his henchmen acted quickly. They closed the cover of a blow, sealing it with nails and melting lead so that it could not be open. The king god, a symbol of life and order, was caught in the dark. Set did not waste time. He ordered to throw the sarcophagus into the Nile, where the waters, who had always nurtured Osiris, dragged him away. Osiris's death was more than a murder, it was an attack against the same principle of the cosmic order. With his disappearance, the fertility of the lands began diminishing, and people fell into chaos. The act of Set not only sought to eliminate his brother but also take his place as ruler. But where Osiris ruled with justice and harmony, Set brought disorder and oppression. The Nile was no longer a symbol of life, it became a river full of uncertainty. Isis, Osiris's wife, refused to accept her husband's fate. With a determination that only a deep love can inspire, began a tireless search to find Osiris' body. The goddess toured every corner of Egypt, facing dangers and challenges, until finally found the sarcophagus trapped among the Juncos del Delta. But his ordeal did not end there. When Set discovered that Isis had recovered the body, dismembered it in 14 pieces and spread them throughout Egypt, making sure that Osiris could never return. The story could have ended there, with victorious Set and the destroyed order. But Isis, with the help of Nephthys, Anubis, and Thoth, gathered each fragment of her husband. In an act of magic and devotion, he rebuilt his body, insufflating enough life to conceive of Horus, the son who would be the incarnation of revenge and justice. Osiris, however, could not return to the world of the living. His destiny was now linked to the duat, the underworld, where he became the judge of souls and the guarantor of life after death. The myth of Osiris's death is much more than a narration of betrayal and redemption. In it, the ancient Egyptians saw a reflection of the eternal cycle of life and death. Osiris represented the seed that must die to bear fruit, the buried grain that is reborn in the harvest. Its dismemberment and reconstruction symbolize the regeneration that occurs in nature and in the human spirit. Set, on the other hand, is not a simple villain. Although his act is of extreme cruelty, his role in the myth is essential for the balance of the universe. It represents the destructive forces that, although feared, are necessary for renewal. Without the chaos that Set embodies, there cannot be a return to order. His conflict with Osiris and later with Horus is not only a struggle of power, but a reminder of eternal tension between disorder and balance, between death and life. The Egyptians also interpreted this myth as a reflection of human struggles. Just as Osiris was betrayed and destroyed, so are people throughout their lives. But as Isis, you can gather the lost, heal wounds, and find a purpose beyond suffering. The myth of Set and Osiris was ultimately a promise that even in the deepest darkness, life would find a way of rebirth, and the sun would shine again on the Nile. The horizon burned under a relentless sun, and the desert wind whistled as if it were the echo of the ancient gods. In that vast scenario of sand and dunes, a struggle that resonated not only in the world of men was fought, but in the same fabric of the cosmos, the eternal confrontation between Set and Horus. It was not simply a war between two gods, it was the very incarnation of the primary conflict between chaos and order, a struggle that defined the very existence of Egypt and its universal balance. Set, with its imposing figure and its huge strength, was the personification of the storm, of the disorder that threatens to devour harmony. He had killed Osiris, father of Horus, in an act of betrayal that triggered an imbalance in the world. Horus, the young falcon, was born with a clear purpose: avenge the death of his father and restore Maat, the beginning of the cosmic order. But this was not an easy mission. Set was not only a formidable adversary, he was also a cunning teacher, a strategist who used both brute force and deception to maintain his power. The conflict between the two was not resolved in a single battle, but in a series of clashes that extended for decades. Each encounter was more fierce than the previous one, and each blow resonated with the fury of the elements. On one occasion, Set challenged Horus to a ship race through the Nile River, a challenge that appeared to be a skill proof, but was loaded with traps. Set built his stone boat, trusting his resistance, while Horus used a wooden. When the race began, the weight of the Set ship sank it, but even then, the god of chaos emerged from the waters, furious and ready to continue the fight. In another confrontation, Set and Horus adopted animal forms to fight. Set became a colossal hippo, symbolizing its connection with the destructive forces of the Nile, while Horus took the form of a hawk, agile and fast, dominating the heavens. The confrontation was brutal, with Horus attacking from the air and Set throwing from the depths of the river. Each wound that were inflicted was a reflection of the suffering that their followers felt on earth: floods, droughts, storms. Men watched, fearful and fascinated, aware that the fate of the world depended on this divine conflict. The most famous combat, and perhaps the most symbolic, happened when Set started Horus's eye in a melee fight. The eye, symbol of perception, balance and protection, was a devastating blow to Horus. But the young god did not give up. With the help of the thought god, the eye was restored, stronger and full of renewed power. Since then, the thigh of Horus became a sacred amulet, a reminder that even in defeat, order can be restored. But Set also suffered wounds. In one of the battles, Horus castrated him, an act that not only physically weakened the god of chaos, but also symbolized the loss of his ability to dominate and destroy. This event marked a crucial turn in its confrontation, because although the fight continued, Set began to lose strength that once made it invincible. The conflict was not just physical, he was also political and symbolic. Each battle represented the struggle for the throne of Egypt, a throne that symbolized the connection between the gods and the pharaohs, the link between the heavenly and earthly order. For years, the gods gathered to deliberate about who deserved to govern, because both Horus and Set presented their arguments with force and determination. Set relied on his experience and power, arguing that he was the strongest and, therefore, the most apt to govern. Horus, on the other hand, appealed to justice and the legitimate inheritance of his father Osiris. The final decision was a reflection of the balance that Egypt valued deeply. Although Horus was recognized as the legitimate ruler, Set was not completely banished. He was granted dominance over deserts and foreign lands, becoming a force that protected the kingdom from its margins. This division of power was not a total defeat for Set or an absolute victory for Horus. It was, in essence, the representation of Ma'at, chaos and order coexisting, each in its place, to guarantee the stability of the cosmos. The battles between Set and Horus not only defined their destinations, but also that of Egypt. In each confrontation, the ancient Egyptians saw a reflection of their own struggles, the floods of the Nile against drought, the human effort against adversity, the triumph of justice over oppression. These myths, transmitted from generation to generation, were not just stories of gods, they were lessons about resilience, sacrifice, and the eternal struggle for balance in a world where chaos is always on the stalking. The sandy sands do not forgive, and just as the desert dunes move and change, so do the gods and the perceptions that surround them. Set, the powerful god of chaos, storms and margins, was not always the dreaded and rejected figure we know in the late times of Egypt. There was a time when his presence was indispensable, a protective god who embodied the necessary strength and resistance to face adversities. However, as Egypt advanced in its history, its image suffered a deep transformation, going from being a respected god, even demonized. In the early days, Set was venerated in specific regions, such as Anubis, where he was recognized as an essential god for protection and survival. His relationship with the desert, with his brutality and mystery, made him an ambivalent but necessary force. He was the guardian of the borders, the Ra protector during his night trip through the Duat, the only one capable of facing face-to-face with Apophis, the snake of the primary chaos. In this role, Set was seen as a bulwark against the destructive forces that threatened the order of the cosmos. But the shadow of his betrayal to Osiris was always present. In the myths, his murder of the just god and his continuous confrontation with Horus placed him in a dangerous position, that of being the antagonist of the forces of order and justice. Although in the first periods this duality was understood as part of the very nature of the universe, where both chaos and order were necessary, Set's perception began to change over time. Set's decline as a respected figure became more evident during the New Kingdom. In this period, Egypt lived an era of military splendor and expansion, but also of growing religious centralization. The temples of Amun-Ra in Thebes acquired unprecedented power, and the Egyptian pantheon began to reorganize around this solar god. Set, whose chaotic nature and associated with foreign lands did not fit with the stability and prosperity narrative that the pharaohs wanted to project, began to be seen with greater distrust. In addition, internal and external conflicts in Egypt contributed to the demonization of Set. During the invasions of the Hyksos, a foreign people who ruled the Nile Delta during the Second Intermediate Period, Set was adopted as one of its main deities. For native Egyptians, this was a devastating blow. Set, the god of storms and borders, became a symbol of the invaders and chaos they brought. Although Set's cult survived in some regions, his association with foreigners and with disorder marked him as a dangerous and treacherous god. Over time, this negative Set image solidified. During the late period, when Egypt faced constant foreign dominations, Persans, Greeks, Romans, the Set figure was almost completely transformed. The texts of this period represent it as an evil god, a force that is no longer necessary for balance, but a danger that must be contained. His connection with Apophis, which was once a sample of his courage to fight it, became proof of his affinity with absolute chaos. The demonization of Set culminated with its comparison with malignant figures from other cultures that arrived in Egypt. During the Greco-Roman domination, Set began to be identified with Typhoon, the Greek mythology monster that embodied destruction and anarchy. This association reinforced its image as an antagonistic figure, stripping it of its protective and necessary aspects that once defined it. However, despite this change, Set never disappeared completely. His cult persisted in small corners of the country, among communities that still recognized their importance in the cosmic balance. In the perpetual struggle between Horus and Set, some saw not only a conflict between good and evil, but an eternal dance of opposite forces that together maintained the universe underway. This Set transformation reflects not only the changes in the religious perception of the Egyptians, but also the fears and challenges of each era. In ancient times, when survival depended on facing and dominating chaos, Set was an ally. But in crisis periods, when chaos seemed to gain ground, its figure became a painful reminder of the fragility of order. In the end, Set remains one of the most complex gods of the Egyptian pantheon, a figure that embodies both the strength and danger, the protector and the traitor. Its history is a mirror of the human soul, of our internal struggles, and of our need to reconcile the opposite forces that define us. Although his image was overshadowed in the last centuries of Egypt, his presence never ceased to be a reminder that even chaos has a role in the great cycle of existence. Under the infinite sky of Egypt, where the Nile flows with the cadence of life itself, the story of Osiris began with a promise of prosperity and justice. He was a god who not only walked among mortals, but transformed his world, becoming the king who taught people to cultivate the earth, live in harmony and honor the principles of Ma'at, the cosmic balance. His rise as a ruler marked a golden era in which the earth flourished, chaos backed away and man and nature lived in a perfect symphony. Osiris was not just a ruler, it was a living symbol of life and renewal. With his wife and sister, Isis, by his side, formed a divine couple who embodied the fundamental pillars of the order. While Isis was the protective and universal mother, Osiris represented the vital force that gives meaning to existence. Together, they brought not only lively to mortals, but also the hope that life could transcend death. However, in the shadows stalked Set, Osiris's brother, whose ambition and jealousy fed on his brother's success. Set, god of chaos and storms, looked with resentment how Osiris reigned with justice, how men worshipped him and how his own place in the cosmos seemed reduced to the sterile lands of the desert. His heart, hardened by envy, began to urge a plan to overthrow and claim for himself the throne of Egypt. The fall of Osiris was an act of betrayal so deep that his echo resonated throughout the cosmos. Set, with cunning and deception, organized a banquet in honor of his brother, a celebration that apparently symbolized family unity. But behind the smiles and the raised glasses a dark purpose was hidden. During the feast, Set presented a magnificent sarcophagus, adorned with gold and gems, promising to give it to those who fit perfectly in him. When Osiris, innocent and confident, he lay down in the sarcophagus, Set and his followers closed the lid with brutality, sealing it with nails and molten lead. The body of Osiris, imprisoned and lifeless, was thrown into the Nile, immersing himself in the depths of a river that he himself had blessed with fertility. The murder of Osiris was not just an act of violence, it was a violation of the universal balance. With his death, Egypt began to wilt, and the fertile land that ate it was the livelihood of the people became dust under the yoke of Set. But Osiris would not be forgotten. Isis, devastated by the loss of her husband, became the incarnation of resilience. He toured every corner of Egypt in search of the body of Osiris, facing dangers, betrayals, and evidence. When he finally found him caught between the junctions of the delta, the tragedy intensified. Set, upon discovering the recovery of the body, dismembered him in 14 pieces and dispersed them throughout Egypt, as if he wanted to erase any trace from his brother in the world. Despite this cruelty, Isis did not give up. With the help of Nephthys, Anubis, and Thoth, he gathered each fragment of Osiris, joining his body with such powerful devotion and magic that the laws of life and death transcended. Although he could not completely return it to the world of the living, he managed to give him enough vitality to conceive of Horus, the son who would one day avenge his father and restore the lost balance. Osiris, now transformed, did not return as the king of Egypt. His destiny was elsewhere, the Duat, the underworld, where he became the supreme judge of souls. From his throne in the beyond, Osiris evaluated the heart of the dead in the balance of Ma'at, making sure that only those whose life had been fair could enter the eternal paradise. His death was not the end, but the beginning of a new purpose that made him the god of resurrection and regeneration. For the ancient Egyptians, Osiris was more than a god, it was the very cycle of life. His death represented the sunset, the grain buried in the earth, and his resurrection symbolized the dawn, the harvest that reborn with each station. Their story not only offered them comfort to death, but also the promise that life, like Nile, would always find a way to renew. The tragedy began in a day that should have been celebrated. Set, Osiris's brother, watched from the shadows how the people acclaimed him as a fair and wise king. Each praise, every gratitude look addressed to Osiris, fed the darkness that grew in the heart of Set. Envy devoured him. He could not bear to see his beloved and respected brother, while he, the lord of the desert and the storms, was feared and sectioned. The resentment seed had thrown roots, and now, its flowering was going to dye the history of Egypt with blood. Set was not a being that acted without a plan. In your mind, a plot as meticulous as perverse. He summoned a banquet, an act that seemed covered with goodwill, a meeting to honor his brother. The gods, confident, accepted the invitation, filling the room with laughs and music. In the center of everything, Osiris, noble and off guard, shone with the majesty that had always characterized it. He never imagined that that night, his destiny would be sealed. In the middle of the party, Set presented its trap, a sarcophagus of indescribable beauty. Carved with the finest materials, adorned with golden inscriptions, it seemed like a gift worthy of a god. Set, with a smile that hid his poison, announced that the sarcophagus would be for those who fit perfectly in him. The guests, between laughs and curiosity, began to try it one by one. When it finally reached the turn of Osiris, confident and without a trace of suspicion, it lay inside. It was at that time that Set's face revealed his true nature. Before Osiris could get up, Set followers pounced on him. They closed the sarcophagus lid with brutal speed, sealing it with nails and molten lead. Osiris's screams drowned inside while those present watched, paralyzed by horror. Set, with a triumphal laugh, ordered that the sarcophagus be thrown into the Nile, the river that Osiris had become a source of life. Now, that same river became its grave. Osiris's body floated for days, caught in the Nile currents, until he finally reached the lands of Byblos. There he was caught between the reeds, as if nature itself would like to protect it from the destiny that Set had imposed. But the god of chaos did not stop there. Upon learning that Isis had found her husband's body, her fury was like an unleashed storm. With a cruelty that only chaos could generate, Set dismembered Osiris, cutting it in 14 pieces that he threw throughout Egypt. Each fragment of the body was a symbol of the fracture of the cosmos, a blow to the divine order that Osiris had established. Set not only wanted to destroy his brother, he wanted to erase his legacy, undo the harmony that had cost him so much work. The earth itself seemed to cry for the loss. The crops wilt, the Nile went back, and the town, plunged into chaos, raised their eyes to heaven in search of answers. Isis, Osiris's wife, go to accept defeat. Promoted by a love as deep as the universe itself, it undertook a search that challenged hopelessness. He wandered by Egypt, collecting each fragment of Osiris's body, facing unimaginable dangers and using his powerful magic to preserve it. Every piece he found was a victory against Set's cruelty, an act of resistance to destruction. When he finally gathered all the fragments, except one, the phallus of Osiris, who had been lost in the waters of the Nile and was replaced by one of gold thanks to the magic of Isis, the goddess used her power to return her life, although only for a brief moment. In that sacred union, they conceived Horus, the son destined to avenge his father and restore the lost balance. The murder of Osiris was not just an act of betrayal, it was a blow to the soul of Egypt. But his story did not end his death. His resurrection, although partial, marked the beginning of a new era. In the underworld, Osiris won the supreme judge, the guardian of the eternal cycle of life, death, and renaissance. And although Set managed to snatch his earthly life, he could never destroy his legacy or turn off the spark of hope that he left in the heart of his people. When the darkness seemed to have completely involved the story of Osiris, it was love and unwavering determination of Isis and Nephthys that illuminated the path to his rebirth. Death had tried to claim Osiris definitively, but had not had the strength of two goddesses whose connection with him was more powerful than any chaos decree. Isis, his wife and protector, and Nephthys, the sister who shared both her pain and her resolution, became the architects of a miracle that transcended the laws of life and death. Isis, with his indomitable spirit, was not consumed by suffering. From the moment Osiris's body was taken away, he undertook a relentless search, guided by a mixture of love, despair, and hope. In every corner of Egypt, he toured scorching deserts and sailed through the Nile, listening to the whisper of the wind and the murmurs of the earth that seemed to point out the way. In each piece of Osiris's body he recovered, Isis saw not only fragments of his beloved, but also pieces of the cosmic order that should be restored. Nephthys, often eclipsed by his older sister, did not hesitate to join this mission. Although her husband, Set, had been the cause of the tragedy, Nephthys did not share her evil. Instead, he felt a deep solidarity with Isis and a pain shared for the loss of Osiris. Together, the two sisters joined their forces, using each fragment of their divine magic to gather the scattered pieces of Osiris. The landscape of Egypt became a sacred map of his pain and hope. Every place where they found a fragment of the body was impregnated forever from its history. When Isis and Nephthys managed to complete this monumental task, they joined Osiris' body with care and reverence that transcends words. It wasn't just an act of physical restoration, each movement, each spell, was loaded with an intention that sought to challenge death itself. His magic, fed by the emotional and spiritual connection they shared with Osiris, invoked primary forces that could not even understand. In this crucial moment, Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, intervened to guide and strengthen the process. With his vast knowledge, he helped the sisters to make a ritual that transcended time and space. Anubis, the god of mummification, also played a key role, using his expertise to preserve the body and allow Osiris's soul to return to him, although only temporarily. When Osiris finally returned to life, his resurrection was not like that of a mortal. Although his body had been restored, his destiny was no longer in the world of the living. He had crossed the threshold between life and death, and his place was now in the duat, the underworld. There, Osiris won the supreme judge, a god whose experience with death made him unique. His resurrection did not mean a complete return, but he did mark the beginning of a new divine purpose, to ensure that the cycle of life and death remained in balance. In the short time that Osiris shared again with Isis, something extraordinary happened. Horus was born from his union, the son destined to face Set and restore the lost balance. Horus would not only be the heir of Osiris, but also a living symbol of resistance and renewal. His birth was the culmination of Isis and Nephthys' efforts, a testimony that even in the depths of the loss, life could be reborn with more force than ever. The renaissance of Osiris is much more than a story about love and magic, it is a story that encapsulates the very essence of Egyptian mythology. It represents the eternal struggle between chaos and order, life and death, and how even in the darkest moments, light can prevail thanks to dedication, unity, and sacrifice. In every corner of Egypt, the echoes of this myth were still alive, remembering mortals who, as Osiris, could find renewal and purpose even after the most devastating loss. In the heart of the Egyptian underworld, the duat, the throne of Osiris shone with a gloomy majesty, surrounded by a silence that was only interrupted by the heartbeat of the hearts of the souls that arrived to be judged. Osiris, the god of resurrection, had become more than a fallen king. From his heavenly throne, he ruled the kingdom of the dead, not with cruelty, but with justice and balance, ensuring that each soul faced the judgment that would determine its eternal destiny. The souls arrived at the duat after crossing a trip full of tests. They carried their heart, not only as a physical organ, but as a living record of their life. This heart was more than a simple testimony, it was the very essence of their actions, thoughts, and decisions. Before Osiris, souls could not lie, because in the duat, the truth was the only currency that mattered. The center of this trial was the balance of Ma'at, a sacred object that represented truth, order, and justice. In a saucer of the balance the heart of the deceased was placed, in the other, the Ma'at pen, light as the air and pure as the cosmos. Osiris, with his serene but imposing face, watched while Anubis, the god with the head of the jackal, supervised the balance. Thoth, the divine scribe, was on the side, prepared to record the result with divine precision. The time of weighing was of an indescribable intensity. The souls, aware that his destiny hung from that balance, felt how the weight of their lives was measured in a fraction of a second that seemed to last an eternity. If the heart was lighter or like the pen, it meant that the deceased had lived in harmony with Ma'at, respecting the principles of order and justice. These souls were taken to Aru, the Junco's fields, an eternal paradise where they could enjoy a full and peaceful existence. But if the heart weighed more than the pen, the fate of the deceased was much more bleak. At that moment, Amit, the devouring of souls, approached from the shadows. This terrifying creature, with the head of a crocodile, the torso of a lion, and the rear of a hippo, fed on impure hearts. Once a myth devoured a heart, the deceased soul was condemned to eternal oblivion, a destination worse than death itself. Osiris, although relentless in his judgment, was not cruel. Its function was not to punish, but preserve the cosmic balance. Through his judgment, he assured that the cycle of life, death, and regeneration continue without interruptions. His presence in the duat offered comfort to those who had lived righteously, but also warned the living of the importance of honoring Marat in each action. The trial room, known as the Two-Truth Room, was surrounded by minor gods and symbols that remembered the fragility of existence. The walls were recorded with texts and scenes that represented the power of Osiris and the solemnity of the trial. Every detail of that place seemed to tell the souls that the truth was inescapable, that there were no masks or excuses in the kingdom of the dead. For the ancient Egyptians, Osiris's judgment was not only a myth, but a guide to live. The funeral texts, such as the Book of the Dead, offered instructions and spells to help souls overcome the duat tests and present themselves before Osiris with dignity. But, in the end, each individual knew that the final judgment depended on his own heart, how his life had lived. On the nights of Egypt, when heaven was filled with stars, people looked up and thought of Osiris, the king who had died, but still reigned in the Burga. His role as a judge of souls was not just a warning, it was a promise of justice, a reminder that, in the balance of Marat, everyone would find their place. The shadows of the duat could be deep, but under the gaze of Osiris, there was always a flash of hope for those who had lived righteously. In ancient Egypt, where everyday life was deeply intertwined with the sacred, Bastet shone as a warm and protective presence, the incarnation of grace and shelter. Represented with the shape of a cat, or sometimes like a completely cat, Bastet was much more than a deity, it was a symbol of the balance between strength and tenderness, a refuge for families, and the protector of the home. The image of Bastet evoked a feeling of calm and security. The cats, their sacred animals, were revered not only for their elegance and mystery, but also because they represented the essence of this goddess. Like the cats that stalked in the shadows to protect the barriers of Egypt from the rats, Bastet tirelessly monitored the homes of their people, keeping the forces of chaos and malignant energies that tried to disturb tranquility. Maternity was in the heart of his divinity. Bastet was seen as the goddess who understood the weight of being a mother, who provided comfort and strength to women in the most vulnerable moments. The mothers invoked her during childbirth, whispering prayers so that her children were born healthy and protected. And when those children grew up, it was believed that Bastet watched them with the same love-care with which a cat takes care of their young. The houses in Egypt were not only physical structures, they were sacred spaces where the family lived, grew, and connected to the divine. Bastet was the invisible guardian of those spaces. It was said that his eyes, attentive like those of a cat that stalks in the gloom, could detect threats that others could not perceive. From diseases to harmful spirits, nothing escaped to his vigilant gaze. But Bastet was not just a passive protector. There was a fascinating duality in it. In the days of calm, she was a kind goddess, who associated with love, music and dance. Their festivals, held with songs and joy, were moments when the people could celebrate life, thank the protection of their homes, and feel the proximity of this maternal deity. However, when the safety of his protected was threatened, Bastet showed his fierce side. Like a cat that arches her back and takes out the claws, the goddess did not hesitate to fierce what was sacred. The temples dedicated to Bastet, especially the famous Bubastis, were more than places of worship, they were shelters where people were looking for comfort and guide. There, the faithful offered small statuettes of cats, amulets and other symbols, thanking the protection they felt in their homes. Women, in particular, went to it with supplications related to motherhood, family, and well-being of their loved ones. In Egyptian homes, it was common to have figures or cat drawings to honor Bastet. These representations were not only decorative, but also a tangible way of connecting with the goddess. Every cat that was around a home was seen as an emissary of his, a small manifestation of his divine presence. It was a reminder that, even in the moments of solitude, Bastet was there, stalking in the shadows, ready to intervene if something threatened the peace of the home. Despite its connection with tranquility and protection, Bastet was never a deity that inspired weakness. His power resided in his ability to be both gentle and dangerous, both a balm for attracted souls and a relentless force against those tried to cause harm. It was a living reminder that strength and care are not opposite, but two sides of the same currency. The Egyptian nights, illuminated by the soft moonlight, used to be accompanied by the masters of the cats, creatures that mortals directly related to Bastet. Every sound, every stealthy movement in the dark, seemed an echo of its presence, a whisper that the home was protected. While families slept, the goddess watched, making sure that at dawn, life continued in harmony. This was Bastet, the home lady, a warm hug in calm times and an impenetrable wall against adversities. In the history of Bastet, a powerful and intriguing duality unfolds, a tension between softness and ferocity that defines its divine essence. As the goddess of the home and motherhood, Bastet was the refuge for those who sought protection and comfort. But that same love deity had a relentless and fearsome side, a warrior capable of unleashing his fury against any threat to the balance and the security he represented. Bastet was not simply a tender figure, it was a reminder that true strength lies in the ability to be both a loving protector and an invincible combatant. In her best-known facet, Bastet was the goddess of homely warmth, music, dance, and love. It was easy to imagine it as a maternal figure, soft as the touch of a cat that is entangled between the legs of their loved ones. The ancient Egyptians went to her in search of protection for their families, knowing that her goodness wrapped those who were under their care. This Bastet was the serene light of the home, the laughter of the children, and the slice that calmed the restless nights. However, when the danger stalked, Bastet changed. His calm was transformed into a storm, its sweetness in indomitable strength. As a cat that in an instant goes from a carefree toy to show its sharp claws, Bastet revealed its warrior side. On these occasions, it was associated with the scorching heat of the sun and the devastating force of a lion. This fierce aspect was a reminder that even the most tender forces have limits, and that crossing them could unleash destructive and implacable force. His relationship with the lion, another symbol of his duality, was essential to understand this aspect of his nature. Although Bastet was mainly represented with the head of a cat, in his fiercest moments he connected with Sekhmet, the Leone goddess. In some versions of the Egyptian myths, Sekhmet and Bastet looked like two faces of the same divine energy. Sekhmet was the destructive, while Bastet was the protector. But even Bastet, the gentle goddess of the home, could channel Sekhmet when circumstances demanded it. This temperature change was not arbitrary. Bastet did not look for the caprice confrontation, but when his protected were in danger or the balance of Ma'at was threatened, he did not hesitate to act. The image of Bastet as a fierce warrior was especially relevant in a society like the Egyptian, where harmony and order were sacred principles. The Egyptians knew that maintaining balance required more than good intentions, a force capable of facing chaos was also necessary. Myths reflected this duality. In stories where Bastet had to defend Egypt or its inhabitants, the goddess was described by unleashing her fury against those tried to disturb peace. In those moments, she was not the goddess of snoring and calm, but an intimidating presence, with burning eyes like embers and claws ready to tear those who dare to challenge her. Even the most fearsome enemies knew that facing Bastet in his fury was a destination worse than death. This duality was also expressed in the rituals and festivals dedicated to Bastet. During their celebrations, the Egyptian people celebrated their kind and generous facet with music, dances, and processions. But at the bottom of these festivities, respect, almost fear, was always present for its warrior appearance. It was a reminder that the joy and protection that it offered were not free concessions, but privileges that she defended with nails and teeth. In Egyptian homes, Bastet's duality was a constant. The cats, their sacred animals, reflected their changing nature. At one point, they were docile companions, symbols of comfort and tranquility. In the next, they became stealthy and lethal hunters, eliminating any threat that dared to invade the sacred space of the home. This feline behavior not only fascinated the Egyptians, but also reinforced their connection with Bastet and the complexity of their divinity. Bastet's duality was not seen as a contradiction, but as a reflection of reality itself. The ancient Egyptians understood that life was full of tensions between opposite forces, calm and storm, love and anger, creation and destruction. Bastet, with his ability to move between these extremes, became a model of how to face the challenges of existence. His example showed that goodness does not exclude strength and that protection does not mean weakness. On the nights of Egypt, when cats roamed the streets and homes, the inhabitants remembered that Bastet, their protective goddess, was always alert. His duality, far from generating uncertainty, provided a sense of security. They knew that in their softness they could find comfort, and in their ferocity, the certainty that they were protected from any evil that tried to disturb the peace of their lives. In the ancient city of Bubastis, located on the banks of the Nile, the devotion to Bastet reached its maximum expression. There, where a magnificent temple dedicated to this goddess was erected, the festivities in her honor filled the streets of a vibrant and contagious energy. Bastet, the protection of the home, motherhood and joy, was not just a divine figure, it was the throbbing heart of a community that found in it comfort, strength, and celebration. The Bubastis temple in Bubastis was an imposing and beautiful place, surrounded by gardens full of shadow and calm waters. Its design reflected the duality of the goddess, an atmosphere of serenity that could become a center of fervor when the faithful congregated. Each stone, every relief in its walls, was recorded with stories that honored their role as a protector and warrior. However, the true spirit of the cult of Bastet was not alone in its temple, but in the festivities that transformed Bubastis into a scenario of overflowing jubilation. Every year, during the Bastet festival, 1,000 deities from people traveled from all parts of Egypt to participate in the celebration. The Nile, usually quiet, was filled with ships decorated with flowers and offerings, sailing to Bubastis with music, songs, and laughs that resonated along their banks. The participants did not arrive as mere spectators, but as devotees who carried their faith and gratitude to the goddess. In the streets of the city, the holiday took its own life. The sounds of the musical instruments filled the air, mixed with the songs that praised the virtues of Bastet. Processions headed by priests and priestesses were organized, who carried statues of the goddess decorated with gold, jewelry, and flowers. These figures, transported with solemnity and joy, symbolized the presence of Bastet between his people, reminding everyone that his vigilant gaze never abandoned his devotees. The festive atmosphere was a mixture of devotion and debauchery. The families gathered to enjoy outdoor banquets, sharing food and wine while talking about the protection and favors that Bastet had granted to them. But there were also moments of euphoria, frantic dances, laughs and games that seemed to overflow the spirit of celebration. For the Egyptians, the joy itself was a way of honoring Bastet, who, as goddess of music and dance, appreciated the sincere expressions of happiness. Cats, sacred for Bastet, were a constant presence at the festival. They were treated with reverence, and many devotees brought their own cats to receive blessings in the temple. These animals, with their elegance and mystery, were seen as living manifestations of the goddess. The stories say that, during the festivities, cats walked freely among the crowd, accepting cares and offerings as if they understood their divine role in that special moment. One of the most significant aspects of the cult of Bastet was inclusion. All, from children to the elderly, participated in the celebrations. The social status or wealth did not matter, the devotion to Bastet united people in a shared experience. In those holiday days, Bubastis became a reflection of the ideal community, where joy and gratitude transcended the differences and reminded the devotees of the importance of protection and mutual care. The festival also had a deeply spiritual side. Although music and dance were prominent, many went to the temple in search of guide or comfort. The priests and priestesses performed rituals and offered blessed amulets to those who were looking for them. Women, in particular, found in Bastet a powerful ally for motherhood and family. His prayers, full of hope, rose to the goddess in search of protection for her children and strength to face the challenges of life. On the nights of the festival, when the torches illuminated the streets of Bubastis and the stars shone in the sky, the devotees felt a special connection with Bastet. It was said that at that time, the goddess was closer than ever, walking among her people in the form of a feline shadow, observing and blessing those who honored her with sincerity. The stories spoke of vivid dreams that some experienced during the festivities, in which Bastet offered them messages or signs that filled them with peace and security. The cult of Bastet in Bubastis was not just a sample of devotion, it was a manifestation of the goddess's very essence. Through joy, music, love and protection, the Egyptians celebrated not only to Bastet, but also the values she represented. In each laugh, in each song, in each offering deposited in its temple, there was the certainty that, while Bastet took care of them, chaos could never overcome harmony. In the Egyptian iconography, Bastet appears as a figure of elegance and power that has captured the imagination for millennia. Represented mainly with the head of a cat and the body of a woman, her images distill a mixture of serenity and mystery. Through these representations, Egyptian artists not only immortalized their beauty and strength, but also their deep connection with cats, creatures that shared their grace and duality. The cat, sacred animal associated with Bastet, was the living incarnation of its attributes. His silent agility, his penetrating gaze and his ability to alternate between absolute calm and sudden ferocity made this animal the perfect symbol of the goddess. In the daily life of Egypt, cats were not only appreciated companions, they were also considered protectors of the home, capable of keeping at bay not only pests, but also to evil forces. This connection between Bastet and the cats was not merely symbolic, the Egyptians saw in their movements and behavior a tangible reflection of the goddess. In sculptures and reliefs, Bastet is frequently represented by holding a sistro, a ceremonial musical instrument that symbolized joy and celebration. This detail underlines her role as a goddess of music and pleasure, a figure that gave joy to the hearts of her devotees. However, the sister was not just an ornament, it was also a reminder of the power of Bastet to harmonize and balance the forces of life. Next to her, there was often a sitting cat, sometimes adorned with jewelry, as an extension of her divinity on earth. Gold and precious stones were recurring materials in Bastet's artistic representations, reflecting their divine status. He painted it with gold and green tones, colors associated with the sun and fertility, central aspects of his identity. In the temples and statuettes, his gaze seemed to radiate a protective presence, as if Bastet's eyes, like those of a cat, could penetrate beyond the visible to scare away any hidden threat. Among the most striking representations are the bronze statuettes that proliferated during the late period of Egypt. These figures, often small or medium size, show Bastet as a stylized cat, with intricate details in the ears, eyes, and legs. Some of these statuettes included inscriptions or spaces inside destined to contain offerings, such as amulets or sacred ashes. This type of art not only served as an object of devotion, but also as a way to physically connect with the protective energy of Bastet. The walls of the temples dedicated to Bastet also offered fascinating representations. Detailed reliefs showed the goddess interacting with pharaohs, offering blessings, or protecting the cosmic order of Ma'at. In some scenes, she was seen defeating enemies of Egypt, with a fierce aura that contrasted with her usual image of serenity. This contrast reinforced his duality and remembered the devotees that Bastet's tenderness did not mean weakness. In amulets and personal objects, Bastet's iconography was omnipresent. Small figures of cats like talismans were taken to attract their protection. These amulets, made of materials such as feta, stone or bronze, were common among people of all social strata. For the Egyptians, carrying a representation of Bastet was not only an act of faith, but also a way of inviting their presence to the most daily moments of life. Mummified cats are another proof of the deep connection between Bastet and its sacred animal. During the excavations in Bubastis and other places, archaeologists have discovered entire necropolis dedicated to mummified cats, offerings made to the goddess as a sign of gratitude and devotion. These mummies, wrapped carefully and often accompanied by inscriptions or jewels, demonstrate how the relationship between Bastet, cats, and their devotees transcended the purely symbolic to become a tangible spiritual bond. The relationship between Bastet and cats also extended to the most daily expressions of Egyptian art. The paintings in the tombs and domestic objects showed scenes of cats resting in home environments, surrounded by food and comfort. For the Egyptians, these images not only celebrated the beauty of cats, but also invoked the protection of Bastet for the hereafter. The iconography of Bastet, with its emphasis on feline grace and protective force, reflects a vision of the divine deeply connected to daily life. In each image, in each statue or amulet, the proximity of a goddess that was not distant or abstract is perceived, but a constant presence that offered comfort and security. Bastet's eyes, immortalized in Egyptian art, continue to observe, protect and remember mortals that, under their gaze, harmony would always prevail. In the heart of Egyptian mythology there is a constant struggle, an eternal dance between two opposite but inseparable forces, Mat and Isfet. The first, incarnation of order, truth and justice; the second, symbol of chaos, lies and destruction. This duality was not only an abstract concept for the ancient Egyptians, but a fundamental truth that molded their vision of the world and its relationship with the divine. Life itself was an act of resistance to chaos, a conscious effort to maintain the delicate balance that Mat represented. Mat was not simply a goddess, but a cosmic principle. It represented the harmony of the universe, the cycle of the day and night, the flow of the Nile, the balance between the gods, men, and nature. Its pen, light and pure, was used in the judgment of souls to determine the righteousness of the human heart. But Mat did not act alone, it depended on the actions of mortals and the gods to maintain their place in the cosmos. Each act of goodness, every word of truth, was a contribution to Mat, a reinforcement of the balance that sustained the universe. At the other extreme, Isfet was the constant threat. It was the chaos that stalked in the dark, the disorder that could crumble creation if it was allowed. Represented as lies, violence and injustice, Isfet was not only an abstract enemy, but a tangible force that the Egyptians believed that they manifested in pests, conflicts and natural disasters. The stories talked about Apophis, the snake of chaos, as one of Isfet's main agents, always trying to devour our solar ship on its night trip. Every night, the gods fought against this threat, ensuring that the dawn arrived and the cycle continued. Isfet's existence was not an anomaly, but an intrinsic part of the universe's fabric. Without chaos, order would not have meaning. This paradox was deeply understood by the Egyptians, so that Mat prevailed, it was necessary to face and overcome Isfet constantly. The pharaoh, as representative of the gods on earth, had the responsibility of acting as a protector of Mat. His government should reflect balance and justice, since any weakness or injustice could open the doors to chaos. The balance between Mat and Isfet was also reflected in everyday life. Laws, rituals, and religious practices were designed to maintain this delicate balance. A farmer who offered part of his harvest to the temples not only fulfilled a religious obligation, but also reinforced Mat by sharing the fruit of the earth. A family that honored its ancestors perpetuated order by respecting the link between generations. Each action, however small, was part of a larger fight against Isfet. However, the fight between Mat and Isfet was not a war that could be won once and for all. Even the gods were vulnerable to the temptations and mistakes that could tip the balance towards chaos. Stories such as Set and Osiris exemplify this tension. Osiris's murder for his brother Set was an act of Isfet that destabilized the divine and human order. But Isis's effort to resurrect Osiris and the final victory of Horus against Set restored Mat, demonstrating that the balance could recover, although not without effort and sacrifice. The Egyptians saw in nature a mirror of this duality. The Nile, a source of life, could overflow and cause destruction if their cycles were not respected. The desert, vast and inhospitable, was both a threat and a reminder of Isfet's power, always present on the margins of civilization. Each controlled flood, each successful harvest, was a sign that Mat still prevailed, although never without the risk of Isfet claiming its place. The balance between Mat and Isfet also had a deeply personal component. Each individual was responsible for maintaining their own inner balance, of aligning their heart with the principles of Mat. The acts of lies, greed, or cruelty not only affected the offender, but also contributed to chaos in the world. On the other hand, goodness, generosity, and justice reinforced universal harmony. The Osiris judgment, with the heart-weighing ceremony, was a symbolic manifestation of this truth. Each action counted, each decision inclined the balance to one side or another. This duality between Mat and Isfet was not a static story, but a narrative in constant movement, an endless cycle of struggle, fall and restoration. For the Egyptians, accepting this truth was fundamental. It was not about eradicating chaos completely, but to learn to navigate it, to understand that order and disorder were two sides of the same currency. In that acceptance, they found not only wisdom, but also a force that allowed them to face uncertainty with courage. On the darkest night, when the stars seemed more distant and chaos threatened to consume everything, the Egyptians trusted that Mat would find their way back. Because even in chaos, there was always an order loom waiting to be restored. In the heart of Egyptian mythology lies the Duat, an unfathomable kingdom of mystery, where the living could not venture and the dead founded their eternal destiny. It was not simply a place of darkness, but a maze loaded with evidence, wonders and horrors. This underworld, essential in the Egyptian worldview, was more than a final destination. It was a reflection of the eternal struggle between order and chaos, a path that each soul should travel to achieve eternity. The Duat was not a unique or uniform place. Their descriptions varied according to funeral texts and local traditions. It could be a vast river with floating islands, a desire brazier toe, or a landscape of tortuous passages and fire lakes. Each corner of the Duat housed challenges designed to test the value, purity, and wisdom of those who dared to travel it. For the Egyptians, these tests were the echo of life itself, a last exam where everything learned and lived made sense. Duat's geography was marked by duality. There were places of great beauty, where the water was clear and the fields promised eternal crops, a reflection of the ideal of earthly life. But there were also areas of extreme danger, inhabited by poisonous snakes, demons with blades by hands and guardians who did not tolerate the presence of impure souls. Every night, the god Ra crossed these regions on his solar ship, facing chaos forces, especially Apophis, the primary snake that sought to devour the light and plunge the world in eternal darkness. For the dead, the Duat was not only a physical space, but also a spiritual journey. When he died, the soul, or Ba, began his journey in this kingdom. The texts of the pyramids and the sarcophagi, together with the Book of the Dead, offered detailed maps and guides to help souls navigate the underworld. These instructions were not only warnings, but empowerment tools, magical formulas, secret names, and prayers that allowed the soul to overcome obstacles and gain favor among the gods and guardians. One of the most feared evidence was to face the Room of the Two Truths, where Osiris, the supreme judge of the underworld, presided over a court accompanied by 42 minor judges. At this crucial moment, the heart of the deceased, considered the seat of consciousness, was placed in a balance. On the other side was Mat's pen, a symbol of truth and order. If the heart was lighter than the pen, the soul was worthy of entering the fields of Yaru, a heavenly version of the earthly Egypt. But if the heart was heavy with the loads of sin and chaos, the soul was devoured by Amit, a crocodile creature, lion body, and hippopotamus legs. There was no worse destiny for an Egyptian than eternal oblivion. The Duat was also a space for transformation. The journey through the underworld not only judged souls, but purified them. Tests, dangers, and visions were opportunities for the deceased to demonstrate his virtue, learn from his mistakes, and achieve a state of spiritual perfection. The gods that inhabited the Duat, such as Anubis and Thoth, acted as guides and witnesses, offering support to those who showed faith and wisdom in their answers and actions. The time in the Duat did not pass linearly. In an instant, the soul could be in front of a door that whispered secrets, and the next one, to face a creature that threatened to devour it. These doors and passages were marked with magical inscriptions that the deceased had to recite correctly to advance. Failure not only meant to get caught, but also face the punishment of eternal chaos. The Duat symbolism also extended to the life of the living. The Egyptians saw in the cycles of the sun and the reflex stations of the journey of the soul. Each Danasa was Ra's victory over the chaos of the Duat, a reminder that order and renewal were always possible. The funeral rituals, carefully designed and executed, sought to equip the deceased with the necessary tools for this trip. From the offerings and funeral statues to the registrations in the tombs, every detail was aimed at guaranteeing success in the hereafter. In the Duat, the concepts of justice and balance were central. The wealth or status of the deceased did not matter. All he told was the truth of his heart and the righteousness of his actions. This idea of equality before the balance of Osiris reflected a deeply entrenched notion that, ultimately, they were all responsible for their own destiny. The Duat was not an absolute place of terror, but a reflection of the human potential to face the unknown with courage. Every soul that crossed this kingdom faced a dilemma: succumb to chaos or emerge transformed and victorious. The Egyptians did not feed the Duat, they respected him as an essential part of existence, a bridge towards eternity that each person had to cross with dignity and faith in the power of order and truth. The Egyptian temples were much more than simple buildings, they were the connection points between the human world and the divine. Sacred spaces designed to house the presence of the gods were places where the everyday and the supernatural were, where mortals could approach the divine through rituals, prayers, and offerings. Each temple, large or small, was a tangible representation of the dwelling of the gods on earth, a sanctuario where divine energy was channeled towards the people and towards the rulers of Egypt. The construction of a temple was not only an architectural act, but a deeply ritualized event. For the Egyptians, each stone placed, each room raised, was an offering to the gods and a reflection of the cosmic order, symbolizing the creation itself. The temples were aligned with the stars, the Nile currents or certain key geographical points, to ensure that they were sacred and were in harmony with the universe. The Karnak temple, for example, was dedicated to Amun-Ra, and its grandiosity and extension served to reinforce the power of the pharaoh, who was seen as the intermediary between the gods and men. The rituals carried out within these temples were equally solemn and loaded with meaning. One of the most important acts was the ritual of the opening of the mouth, carried out in the statues of the gods. This symbolic act was aimed at awakening the god represented in the statue, allowing him to receive offerings, listen to prayers and grant his blessings. The priest in charge of this ritual had to recite prayers and magical formulas to ensure that divinity could inhabit the statue and manifest in the temple. The sacrifices and offerings formed an essential part of these rituals. The Egyptians not only offered food, wine, and perfumes, but also sacrificed animals, especially oxen, which were sacrificed in honor of the gods. These offerings were perceived as a means to establish a link with divinities, an act of reverence and gratitude that maintained balance and harmony between human beings and gods. Offerings were not only materials, but also spiritual, such as prayers or hymns dedicated to deities. The priests were responsible for ensuring that the ceremonies were carried out with maximum devotion and precision, since their responsibility was to maintain communication between the divine and earthly worlds. Access to temples was largely restricted. Only the priests and the pharaoh could enter the most sacred parts, the heart of the temple, where the statue of the god was. The common faithful could only reach the outer courtyards or the first rooms. This assured that contact with the divine remained in the hands of those considered pure and legitimate intermediaries. The pharaohs, meanwhile, participated in fundamental rituals for the stability of the kingdom. One of the most significant was the ritual of the New Year, which consisted of the pharaoh approaching the statue of God and renewed his divine mandate. This act symbolized the renewal of the cosmic cycle and the maintenance of order and prosperity in the kingdom. Luxor's temple, for example, was a ritual center of great importance in Egypt, dedicated to Amun-Ra. In this temple, an annual festival known as the Fiesta del Veil was celebrated, where Pharaoh carried out processions and ceremonies in honor of divinity. In this event, the statue of the god was transported from the temple of Karnak to the Luxor temple, a journey that symbolized the union of heaven and earth, the encounter between the divine and the human. These types of festivities were moments of deep connection with the gods, and its celebration guaranteed that the pharaoh continued to rule with the divine favor. Temples were also teaching and knowledge centers. In them, priests not only performed rituals, but also taught education about science, astronomy, medicine, and writing. Thoth's temples, such as Hermopolis, were known for being centers of wisdom, where priests studied the stars and time, because the control of the calendar and stations was essential for agriculture. Each temple, somehow, was a school of life and spirituality, where the Egyptians learned not only about deities, but about how to live in harmony with the cosmos. The design of the temples, with their huge columns and rooms decorated with reliefs, also had a symbolic purpose. The temple represented a kind of microcosm of the universe. The central sanctuary, where the statue of the god resided, was considered the abode of divinity, the heavenly scope. The external rooms and courtyards represented the earthly world, while the columns and ceilings that rose to the sky reflected the connection between both kingdoms. In this way, the temples were not only places of worship, but also three-dimensional representations of the cosmic order that the Egyptians believed fundamental for the stability of creation. Daily rituals in temples were also essential to maintain the relationship with the gods. From dawn, the priests made sentences and offered incense to the gods, assuring that the sun will rise every day and that life continued its natural course. These acts of devotion, although apparently simple, were essential for the continuity of the universe and for the protection of the pharaoh and the Egyptian people. Each temple, with its own pattern of rituals and dedications, was a link in a cosmic network that united the gods and men. The sacred temples of Egypt were not only stone buildings, but doors to the divine, places where the balance between order and chaos, between life and death was preserved. Each ceremony, each offering, each prayer was an effort to maintain the favor of the gods and ensure the eternity of the kingdom. In those sacred spaces, the earthly and the divine world were in an eternal dance of renewal and veneration. The magic in Egyptian mythology was not just a set of mystical acts or spells, it was a primary force that permeated the entire universe. In the Egyptian worldview, magic, or Heka, was considered one of the fundamental forces of creation. It was understood that magical power was not only a tool that human beings could use, but also an integral part of the cosmic order established by the gods. The Egyptians believed that magic was as old as the same universe, a power that arose from the creation of the world and that it continued to exist in all aspects of life. Each god and goddess had a dominion over certain aspects of magic. For example, Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, was also the master of spells and divine magic. His knowledge of the secrets of the universe gave him the ability to alter realities through words and magical formulas. Isis, on the other hand, was the goddess of healing magic, known for her ability to conjure spells that protected, healed, and even resurrected. Thus, magic was intertwined with the very nature of the gods, becoming a link between the divine and human world. The Egyptians practiced a magic that was deeply connected with their religious rituals and beliefs. Magic was not only used to protect themselves from evils or to cure diseases, but also to ensure the prosperity of the kingdom, health and well-being of the pharaoh, and even to guarantee a peaceful existence in life after death. The priests and sorcerers played a crucial role in this ritual magic, since it was they who possessed the knowledge of the ancient spells and the sacred words that could invoke divine power. One of the most important elements of Egyptian magic were protective spells. These spells were not only designed to protect a person from dark forces or evil spirits, but also served to maintain the order and stability of the cosmos. Protective magic was used in all areas of life, from the construction of tombs to pregnancy and birth, through the daily life of the Egyptians. The funeral texts, such as the Book of the Dead, were full of enchantments that helped the deceased to cross the duat, the underworld, and guarantee his rebirth in eternal life. The symbols were a powerful form of magic in ancient Egypt. Iconography and amulets, loaded with mystical meanings, protected people of all kinds of dangers. Horus's eye, for example, was one of the most popular and powerful amulets. This symbol, which represented the surveillance and power of Horus, the halcyon god, not only protected the Egyptians from the forces of evil, but also granted them health and well-being. This eye, with its thorough details, was not simply a visual representation, but a magical invocation that kept evil away. Other important symbols included the Ankh, the key to life, which represented immortality, and Beetle, a rebirth and protection symbol. These amulets were taken as talismans, often in the form of necklaces, rings or bracelets, hoping that their magical power would protect the bearer from any damage, illness or misfortune. Beetles, for example, were also related to the sun and renaissance cycle, a symbolism that was crucial for the Egyptian religion. Its form, round and endless, evoked the idea of eternal life, and were used to accompany the dead on their journey to the hereafter. The priests played a central role in the realization of ritual magic. They were trained in the knowledge of magical words, formulas, and gestures that had the power to invoke the gods and alter destiny. These formulas were recited in the rituals, and each word had a deep and specific meaning. The exact pronunciation of spells was crucial, because even a small mistake could invalidate the facts or, worse, attract chaos. The precision in Egyptian magic was synonymous with control over destiny. The use of magic was also related to the concept of Mat, the principle of truth, justice, and cosmic order. Magic should not only be used for good and protection, but also to maintain balance between order and chaos, between gods and humans. The improper use of magic, such as black magic or curse spells, was considered an act of imbalance that could endanger the stability of the cosmos. The Egyptians feared the consequences of such acts and, therefore, struggled to practice magic within the limits established by the gods. A particularly significant area of Egyptian magic was its use in funeral rituals. Death was not seen as a definitive ending, but as a transition to another state of existence. For the dead, magic was an essential tool to ensure that they could navigate the duat and achieve eternal life. The funeral texts, such as the Book of the Dead, contained spells aimed at protecting the deceased from the dangers that stalked in the underworld. For the Egyptians, it was not simply a utilitarian tool, but a way to connect with the gods, to influence destiny and ensure protection and prosperity. Through spells, symbols, and rituals, the Egyptians believed that they could live in harmony with the universe and maintain peace between the divine and mortal worlds. Egyptian mythology, with its deep worldview and its powerful gods, has left an indelible mark on several cultures throughout history, especially in Greek and Roman traditions. Its influence can be traced not only in the myths and gods adopted, but also in religious practices, the symbols and rituals that were integrated into the beliefs of other civilizations. Egypt, being a center of wisdom and power in the ancient world, fascinated peoples of the entire Mediterranean and beyond. The Greek culture was one of the first to borrow elements of Egyptian mythology. During the Ptolemaic dynasty, especially under the reign of Cleopatra VII, the interactions between Egypt and Greece were common, and the Greeks had a deep respect for Egyptian culture. Throughout their history, the Greeks came to adopt several Egyptian gods, reinterpreting them and fusing them with their own pantheon. The Isis goddess is perhaps the most famous example of this adaptation. Originally, Isis was one of the most important deities of Egypt, a goddess of motherhood, magic and protection. The Greeks not only recognized her, but they integrated her into her own mythology, where they venerated her as a cosmic and protective goddess. The temples dedicated to Isis flourished throughout the Greek world, and their cult was particularly strong in cities such as Delos, in Greece, and on the island of Rhodes. In fact, the figure of Isis remained popular even in the Roman Empire, and many associated it with aspects of the mother goddess in other religions, such as Ceres or Demeter in Greek mythology. As for Horus, the falcon god, the Greeks also took him as a symbol of real power and divine authority. However, in Hellenic culture, Horus merged with the Greek god Apollo, the god of the sun and music, due to the similarities between them in their attributes of protection, light and power. This relationship was especially strengthened in Horus representations such as the young solar god, often linked to rebirth, healing and protection, values shared with Apollo. Egyptian influence also extended to Greek art and architecture. The Greek temples, for example, showed Egyptian influences both in the form and structure, with imposing columns that evoked the great forms of the Egyptian temples. The Greeks, like the Egyptians, believed that their temples and divine purple, and in them rituals were performed both outside and interior, reflecting the Egyptian tradition of establishing sacred spaces for the gods. In addition, the use of obelisks in public decoration was taken from the Egyptians and became a symbol of power in Greek and Roman cultures. In Rome, the Egyptian influence reached its maximum splendor during the Roman Empire. After the conquest of Egypt by Julio Caesar, and later by Emperor Augusto, Roman culture adopted several elements of Egyptian mythology, both in terms of deities and in symbols. The goddess Isis, as in Greece, continued to be venerated and became one of the most popular deities throughout the Roman Empire. Not only was he worshipped in Egypt, but his cult extended throughout the Mediterranean, from Rome to the islands of the Aegean, passing through Asia Minor. Through the figure of Isis, the Romans approached the magic, maternity and resurrection, all essential characteristics in the Egyptian cult. The god Serapis, who combined aspects of Osiris and Apis, was one of the most unique creations of this fusion between Hellenistic Egypt and the Greek-Roman world. Created under the reign of Ptolemy I, Serapis was a syncretic deity that represented the union of several religious traditions. His figure was a god of healing, fertility and salvation, and quickly gained adherents throughout the Roman Empire. Serapis's worship even became a symbol of the union of Greek and Egyptian cultures. Beyond the deities, the Egyptian myths also left their brand in neighboring cultures. The concept of the trip to the underworld and the judgment of the soul, represented by the myth of Osiris and the trial in the balance, was an issue that the Romans partially adopted, although in a more individualistic way. The idea that the human soul should be judged and heavy before entering the beyond merged with other Roman funeral traditions, giving rise to concepts that would influence Christian beliefs about the final judgment. The Egyptians, being known for their wisdom in astronomy and mathematics, also influenced the sciences of the Greeks and the Romans. Greek astronomers, such as Ptolemy, developed their theories and observations based on the ancient Egyptian traditions of star observation. The Egyptian notion of a precise calendar, based on the solar and lunar cycle, was adopted by the Romans and laid the foundations for the Julian calendar, which would later be reformed in the Gregorian calendar. However, the Egyptian influence was not limited only to Greek and Roman cultures. Throughout the centuries, Egyptian mysticism was also absorbed by other traditions, such as primitive Christianity and religions of the Middle East. In the Renaissance, European scholars were attracted to the ancient Egyptian texts, reviving interest in Egyptian beliefs and their symbolism, especially in the field of alchemy and magic. The Egyptians, through their myths and symbols, left a legacy that would resonate in many cultures, each adapting and reinterpreting the old wisdom to their own context. Egyptian mythology, with its richness of stories, symbols, and teachings, transcended the borders of its own time and place, and continues to exert a powerful influence on modern cultures. Although their myths were initially so alien to other traditions, the universality of their themes, life, death, resurrection, cosmic balance, and fascination with Egyptian gods, ensure that this mythology remains one of the most influential of human history. In the 19th century, something extraordinary happened. The desert, which for centuries had kept the relics of one of the most fascinating civilizations in history under its sand layer, began to whisper its secrets to the modern world. The rediscovery of Egypt, promoted by a rebirth of interest in antiquity, transformed the Egyptian mythology of a series of ancient and unknown stories into a source of astonishment, study, and reverence. Egyptology, the discipline that was responsible for digging up and studying Egyptian cultures, began to bloom with a passion that was only comparable to that of archaeologists who unearthed pyramids and temples. One of the most significant moments of this rediscovery occurred in 1799, when a French expedition led by Napoleon Bonaparte discovered Rosetta's stone in the city of Rashid, Rosetta. This artifact, which contained inscriptions in 3 forms of writing, Egyptian hieroglyphs, ancient and Demotic Greek, was the key that allowed scholars to decipher the mysteries of ancient Egypt. For centuries, the Egyptian hieroglyphs had been an enigma, a mysterious writing that no modern scholar could to understand. However, Rosetta's stone, with its repeated message in 3 languages, allowed Egyptologists to finally decipher the hieroglyphs and open the doors to the vast knowledge of Egyptian mythology, history, and religion. With the decipherment of the hieroglyphs, Egypt began to leave the veil of the centuries of oblivion, and their gods, temples, and myths appear before the eyes of a modern Europe fascinated by the mysteries of the ancient civilizations. In the first half of the 19th century, interest in Egypt grew greatly, and with it, Egyptology was consolidated as an academic discipline. The scholars began to carry out excavations in ancient Egypt, digging up real tombs, temples dedicated to forgotten gods and, the most amazing, religious and funeral texts that gave a new light on the beliefs and myths of this civilization. The stories about the Egyptian gods, who for centuries had been relegated to myths, began to be seen in a different way. Ra, Osiris, Isis, Set, and the other gods were no longer only mythical figures of a distant past, but now they came to life through the stories written in papyrus and the inscriptions that adorned the walls of the tombs and temples. The idea that these gods ruled the cosmos and protected the order of the universe ceased to be a simple religious tradition to become a fascinating field of study. The interest in Egyptian mythology extended beyond academic circles. Egypt became a symbol of mystery, power, and exoticism. As the excavations revealed more artifacts, objects, and treasures, the popular fascination for Egyptian culture also grew. Egyptian art exhibitions, obelisks, mummies, and sarcophagi began to fill European museums, and the illustrations of the tombs of the pharaohs, the gods, and scenes of the Book of the Dead became a recurring theme in art and the literature of the time. Egypt became a symbol of ancient wisdom, and the Egyptian imagery flooded collections and galleries around the world. Throughout the 19th and 20th century, the most prominent Egyptologists, such as Jean-François Champollion, who first deciphered the hieroglyphs, and other pioneers such as Flinders Petrie and Zahi Hawass, made discoveries that changed our understanding of ancient Egypt forever. They found tombs of pharaohs, such as Tutankhamun in 1922, which revealed a treasure without equal, and discovered the sacred texts that narrated the myths of the Egyptian gods, offering a deeper vision of their rituals and beliefs. Through these excavations, myths about Horus, Osiris, Isis, and Set, which only existed in sacred texts and oral stories, became tangible to the modern world. The funeral texts, the scenes of the temples, and the spoiled stone stelae told stories of gods that fought, died, and resurrected, of a cosmos ordered by divine forces, and of a kingdom governed by the pharaoh as representative of the gods on earth. One of the most fascinating aspects of Egypt's rediscovery was the way in which their myths began to influence modern art and culture. The images of the Egyptian gods, with their solemn faces and their bodies in stylized forms, were adapted in works of art, literature, and cinema. The Egyptian themes became a symbol of sophistication and mystery, especially during the Egyptomania fever that broke out in Europe in the 19th century. Architects and artists began to incorporate Egyptian elements into their designs, and the ancient Egypt became a recurring theme in fashion, design, and literature. This fascination with Egyptian aesthetics and iconography persisted in popular culture, and the figure of the mummy, for example, became a popular theme in horror and fiction cinema. The rediscovery of Egypt also marked a new era in the understanding of the beyond. The study of funeral texts, such as the Book of the Dead, allowed Egyptologists to study the vision of life after death that the Egyptians had. The meticulous preparation of the dead, mummification, and beliefs about the judgment of souls in the duat became areas of great interest. The Egyptians believed that death was not the end, but a transition to another kingdom, and that the soul should be protected and guided through a complicated process to achieve eternal life. These beliefs offered a unique perspective on death that contrasted with Christian and Hellenistic visions. As the 20th century progressed, Egyptology consolidated itself as a respected scientific discipline, and the fascination with Egyptian myths continued to be an important part of the global interest in Egypto-Egyptian art. Exhibitions traveled all over the world, and great universities continued the deep study of Egyptian languages and texts. The magic, myths, and beliefs of this ancient civilization remained a bridge between the past and the present. The rediscovery of Egypt not only brought with it a deeper understanding of its mythology, but also allowed Egyptian myths to integrate into the global consciousness. Today, the stories of the Egyptian gods remain a source of inspiration in various fields, from literature to cinema, through art and philosophy. The magic and myths of ancient Egypt remain a fundamental part of popular culture, and the fascination for its gods, temples, and mysteries is still alive. Egyptian myths have survived for millennia, resisting the passage of time and cultures. At present, these ancient legends remain a powerful source of inspiration for contemporary culture, from cinema to literature and visual art. Despite the differences in form and style, the myths of Egypt continue to be reinterpreted, offering new ways of understanding the divine, the human, and the mysterious in the modern world. Cinema has been one of the main vehicles through which Egyptian myths have found their way in contemporary popular culture. From the Hollywood classics to modern films, the influence of Egypt is unmistakable. The figure of the pharaoh, the majesty of the pyramids, the mummies, and the gods like Ra and Anubis have been recurring symbols on the big screen. One of the most representative examples of this influence is the series of mummy films, which, although not strictly follow the Egyptian myths, incorporates fundamental elements of Egyptian mythology. In this saga, the mummies are key figures that, when resurrected, bring former secrets and supernatural powers. These films, full of action and adventure, have not only fed fascination with Egypt, but have also entertaining issues such as life after death, curse, and final judgment, intrinsic issues to Egyptian myths. Beyond the stories of mummies, contemporary cinema has directly explored to the Egyptian gods. La película Dioses de Egipto, 2016, por ejemplo, es una de las representaciones más recientes en la que los dioses egipcios como Horus, Set y Ryugan un papel central. Although it was criticized for its visual approach and its distortion of certain myths, it shows how the Egyptian gods still have a prominent role in the modern narrative. These gods, with their supernatural powers and their relationship with humans, are presented in a way that highlights their divinity, but also their humanity, showing the eternal conflict between order and chaos, between light and darkness. In literature, Egyptian myths have been a source of inspiration for contemporary writers seeking to explore universal issues of love, death, revenge, and resurrection. Author Agatha Christie, known for her detective Hercule Poirot, was inspired by Egypt in her novel Death in the Nile, 1937, which takes place in a scenario where the ancient Egyptian beliefs intertwine with contemporary crimes and mysteries. While the novel does not focus directly on myths, the atmosphere of Egypt, with its temples, ruins, and the symbolism of life and death, reflects the eternal fascination with Egyptian civilization. Egyptian myths have also been a basis for authors of fantastic literature, such as Rick Riordan, who included the Egyptian gods in their series The Heroes of Olympus and the Red Pyramid. Riordan, known for his series about Greek and Roman mythology, expanded his universe by including Egyptian beliefs. In these books, the Egyptian gods such as Isis, Horus, and Set have active roles, interacting with human characters and fighting for the control of the world. The myths, although reinterpreted, retain key elements such as the trial in the hereafter, the concept of death and rebirth, and the eternal struggle between chaos and order. This modern version of myths not only introduces a young audience to ancient Egyptian beliefs, but also presents a fresh and exciting vision of those gods. Egyptian influence on contemporary visual art is also remarkable. Artists from all over the world have used symbols and figures of Egyptian mythology to express issues of power, spirituality, and transcendence. The Egyptian gods, with their human and animal characteristics, have been represented in an innovative way, merging traditional styles with modern approaches. The representation of Ra, Horus, Anubis, and other gods in contemporary art often explores the relationship between divinity and humanity, tiling to capture the eternal power of these mythical beings in ways that resonate with the concerns of modern society. Graphism, comic and illustration have been other fields in which Egyptian myths have found a home. In comic vignettes, for example, modern reinterpretations of figures such as Isis, Osiris, and Set can be found, fighting cosmic forces in epic stages. These stories not only maintain the essence of myths, but they update them, merging the richness of the Egyptian tradition with contemporary narrative demands. In the field of digital art, the Egyptian gods are still represented in a variety of styles, from the most abstract to the most realistic, always transmitting the feeling that these beings, although other people outside humanity, continue to influence the forces of the universe. Egyptian symbolism also remains a reference in contemporary design. The image of the Horus eye, known for its protective power, has been integrated in everything, from jewelry to graphic design, and has become a modern icon of protection and wisdom. The hieroglyphs, with their mysterious writing, have also been used as inspiration in tattoos, works of art and branding, evoking a connection between ancient Egypt and the present. What is really fascinating is how Egyptian myths have survived, not only as ancient stories, but as an active part of the collective imaginary. Although contemporary societies no longer practice Egyptian religion, myths remain a rich source of interpretation. The struggle between chaos and order, the concept of death and rebirth, and the influence of the divine on the human, remain universal issues that resonate in modern life. Through cinema, literature, and visual arts, Egyptian myths continue to touch the heart of humanity, revealing that, despite the centuries of distance, the ancient Egyptian gods still have much to say about human nature and their relationship with the cosmos. Egyptian mythology was not only a set of stories about supernatural gods and beings, it was the fabric that supported the vision of the world of the Egyptians. Every god, every myth, not only had a place in religious narrative, but was a fundamental piece in the construction of the identity of an entire people. For the Egyptians, their gods were not distant in the sky or in distant kingdoms, they lived in their day-to-day, in the Nile, in the temples, and in the daily customs. The connection between the divine and the human was so strong that myths and beliefs were intertwined with daily life, affecting the way in which the Egyptians understood their place in the world. The power of the gods was present in every corner of Egyptian life, from the fertility of the Nile that made agriculture possible, to the rules of morality and social order. In this context, Egyptian myths were not only explanations of how the universe or history of the first gods formed, but they acted as guides on how to live, how to die, and how to interact with the divine and the human. Every aspect of life, from politics to death, was influenced by the presence of the gods. Pharaohs, for example, were not seen only as earthly leaders, but as intermediaries between gods and humans. In many cases, they were considered direct descendants of the gods, a divine link that gave them authority and power. The pharaohs ruled with the support of the gods, and their role was to ensure that the mat, the divine order, and the cosmic balance remained on earth. This meant that pharaoh should not only govern wisely, but also honor the gods and act as a bridge between the divine and human worlds. The pharaoh should follow the dictates of the gods, who represented the supreme law of the universe, to maintain the stability and prosperity of Egypt. The concept of Mat, symbolized by the goddess of the same name, was not only a moral principle, but the very basis of the cosmic order, something that the gods sustained with their own existence. Each Egyptian god represented a primary force or a specific aspect of the cosmos. Ra, the god of the sun, for example, not only illuminated the earth, but symbolized the creation itself. His journey through heaven in his solar ship reflected the cycle of life and death. Ra not only gave light to the world, but guided the life of the Egyptians from birth to their death. The struggle against the snake Apophis, which represented chaos, reflected the eternal battle between order and disorder, a struggle that the Egyptians believed that it should be fought every day, both at the cosmic and earthly level. Isis, on the other hand, was not only the goddess of love and magic, but also the protector of the family and maternity. The Egyptians saw in Isis a maternal, loving, and protective figure. She was the one that guaranteed the well-being of children and the fertility of women. Her story with Osiris, her husband and brother, who was killed by Set and resurrected thanks to her power, reflected hope and belief in life after death. The death of Osiris not only represented the end of life, but the promise of a rebirth, an eternal cycle of life and death that was central in the Egyptian worldview. The importance of myths was also reflected in funeral rituals, which were essential for the Egyptians. They firmly believed in life after death and the need to be prepared for the trip to the beyond. The figure of Osiris, as god of the resurrection and judgment of souls, was present in each of the funeral rites. The belief in the final judgment, where the heart of the deceased was heavy against Mat's pen, was deeply rooted in Egyptian identity. Death was not the end, but a step towards an eternal existence, and for this transition to be successful, it was necessary to follow the dictates of the gods. The mummies, the tombs, the funeral treasures, and the sacred texts, such as the Book of the Dead, were part of the belief that the Egyptians had to prepare to be received by the gods in the beyond. In addition, the Nile, the great artery of Egyptian life, had a sacred connection with the gods. The river was not only a source of livelihood, but it was considered a divine river. It was thought that the Nile was the body of the gods on earth, and their annual flood, which brought fertility to culture lands, was seen as a divine gift. The gods governed the waters of the Nile, and their control over the river was associated with control over life itself. Without the intervention of the gods, Egyptian agriculture would not have been possible, and without agriculture, there would have been no civilization. In this way, myths related to the Nile not only explained the natural phenomena, but also reaffirmed the dependence of the Egyptians of the divine forces for their survival. The role of the gods in the life of the Egyptians was also reflected in their art, architecture, and literature. The temples, built in honor of deities, were not only places of worship, but physical manifestations of the link between the gods and humans. Each temple was designed to be a abode for the gods, and the pharaohs and priests were responsible for maintaining those temples and making the sacrifices and rituals to maintain good divine will. The statues of the gods, the paintings of the walls, and the inscriptions in the temples were not only decorations, they were ways of paying tribute to divinities and maintaining the constant flow of divine energy towards the people. Thus, Egyptian mythology not only modeled the identity of individuals, but the very structure of society. The divine order, the role of the pharaohs, the connection with nature and life after death, everything was intertwined with the stories of the gods. Every myth, every god, not only taught the Egyptians about the cosmos, but about how to live in harmony with him. Through their myths, the Egyptians understood that the universe was a place where chaos and order should be in balance, where the gods watched over them, and where death was not an end, but a continuation of an eternal cycle. Egyptian myths, therefore, were not just stories, they were the very basis on which the Egyptians built their vision of the world. The Egyptian myths, although they were born in a distant cultural and temporal context, remain an inexhaustible source of wisdom and teaching that crosses the times and resonates with current humanity. Each story of the Egyptian gods, every story about creation, death, and rebirth, not only seeks lives. In these myths, there are principles and reflections that remain in force, teachings that transcend the religious beliefs of ancient Egypt, and that remain applicable to modern societies. One of the first and deepest messages offered by Egyptian myths is the importance of balance, a lesson reflected in the central figure of Mat. Mat, goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order, not only represented the principle of universal balance, but its name itself became synonymous with harmony that should exist among human beings, gods, and nature. The Egyptian vision of the world was founded on the premise that disorder, chaos, should be avoided at all costs, and that only through Mat's practice could individuals and society find prosperity and stability. The fight against chaos, represented by beings such as Apophis, the enemy of Ra, and Set, the god of chaos and destruction, symbolized a constant battle to preserve order and justice, both in the universe and in everyday life. Egyptian myths also teach us about the impermanence of life and the inevitability of death, a recurring theme in the figure of Osiris. His story, from his murder at the hands of Set to his resurrection, is not only a story of revenge and justice, but a lesson about the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Death, in ancient Egypt, was not seen as the final end, but as a transition to a new phase of existence. This concept of death as part of an eternal cycle invites human beings to reflect on the transcendence, meaning of life and the legacy they leave behind. The Egyptians believed that the soul, after death, should be judged by Osiris in the duat, and that only those who had lived according to the principles of Mat could access eternal life. This notion of a final judgment reminds us of the importance of living in full, honoring our principles and values, because in the end what persists is not the material, but the essence of what we have been. Another essential teaching of Egyptian myths is the power of love and family faithfulness, a lesson that is in the relationship between Isis and Osiris. Throughout the myth, Isis is not only the devout wife of Osiris, but a figure that demonstrates the strength of unconditional love and loyalty to adversity. After the death of Osiris, Isis embarks on a desperate search to recover her husband's body, and finally resurrects it with magic. His love for Osiris knows limits, and his tireless dedication is an example of the transforming force of true love. This story also underlines the importance of perseverance and determination in the face of difficulties, teaching us that even in moments of despair, love and loyalty can lead us to overcome the most insurmountable obstacles. Egyptian myths also invite us to reflect on the balance between the human and the divine, a teaching that is found in the figure of Horus. Horus, the son of Isis and Osiris, represents both the protection of human beings and divine royalty. His fight against Set for the throne of Egypt symbolizes the struggle between order and chaos, but also the need of human beings to live in harmony with the divine. Horus is not only a god, but also a protector of human beings, and his story highlights the idea that the gods are not distant and inaccessible beings, but are present to guide, protect, and balance the forces of the world. This relationship between gods and humans emphasizes that our existence is intrinsically linked to the divine and that, following spiritual and ethical principles, we can achieve a life full of purpose and balance. Another fundamental aspect of Egyptian myths is the importance of justice and morality, reflected in the Osiris trial ceremony, where the dead are heavy in Mat's balance. In this trial, the heart of the deceased is placed in a balance and compared to Mat's pen, which symbolizes truth and justice. If the heart was pure and balanced, the soul could access the kingdom of Osiris and enjoy eternal life. This image tells us about the importance of being fair and honest, not only in earthly life, but also in the spiritual plane. Justice, in Egyptian thought, was not only a matter of law, but of alignment with the cosmic order. In a world governed by the gods, living with righteousness and in harmony with the universe was essential to achieve eternal peace. Finally, Egyptian myths offer us a lesson about the power of transformation and resilience. Like Osiris, he rises after his death, and that Horus defeats Set to claim their place. The Egyptians believed in the capacity for personal and collective transformation. Life was not static, but a continuous process of change and renewal. This idea of transformation not only refers to the resurrection in the hereafter, but to the possibility of growing, learning, and overcoming challenges throughout our lives. The Egyptians understood that the true strength did not reside in avoiding suffering or failure, but in the ability to reborn and reinvent oneself, as the sun that every morning resurrects on the horizon, bringing with it a new opportunity to live. In summary, Egyptian myths are not only ancient stories, but deep lessons about life, death, love, justice, and balance. These teachings, which have crossed time, remain a lighthouse that illuminates the way to a fuller life, with seer and connected to the eternal principles of the cosmic order. They are lessons of wisdom that, although they were born in the pharaonic Egypt, remain relevant and valuable to the modern world. In the vast and intricate Egyptian mythology, many stories have been transmitted through the centuries, especially those that involve the best-known gods such as Ra, Osiris, Isis, and Horus. However, beyond the narratives that dominate the main canon, there are less-known but equally fascinating stories, loaded with symbolism and deep lessons that reveal the richness of Egyptian thought. One of these little-mentioned stories is the story of Tefnut and Shu, the gods of humidity and air. Tefnut, goddess of moisture, and Shu, god of the air, were children of Ra, creator of everything that exists. The story that is often omitted in the most popular stories speaks of how, after the creation of the world, Tefnut was lost. Seeing that his daughter had moved away, Shu undertook a long trip to find her. This story, although apparently simple, symbolizes the connection and dependence between the elements of nature, and how cosmic balance can be altered when even the gods lose their course. Shu's trip reflects the internal journey that all human beings must undertake to find balance in their life. Another less-known story is Sekhmet's myth, the goddess lion of war and healing, one of the most complex deities of Egypt. Although it is commonly remembered by its fierce appearance and its role as a destructive, there is a less disclosed story that shows us its healing facet. According to the myth, having wreaked havoc and destruction to humans on behalf of Ra, Sekhmet regretted his fury and looked for a way to heal the chaos he had caused. In a symbolic turn, Ra sent him a drink made of red-dyed beer to calm his fury. When drinking it, Sekhmet was so intoxicated that he stopped being destructive and became the goddess of healing. This myth of transformation, to move from destruction to healing, reflects how the Egyptians understood the power of duality and the ability to change even the most extreme facets of nature. The goddess Hathor, mainly known as the goddess of love, music and dance, also has less-known stories. One of them shows us their relationship with Ra and his role in the creation of the first human being. According to legend, Ra, fearful that humanity rebelled against him, sent Hathor to punish humanity. She became the fierce goddess Sekhmet, who began to massacre men. However, when he saw the damage that his action caused, he decided to intervene. He ordered a lot of red-dyed beer, which was scattered throughout the country. Hathor, seeing the drink, believed it was blood and, when consuming it, drunk and lost his fury. In the blink of an eye, the goddess went from being a symbol of violence to one of sweetness and joy, which reminds us that even the most destructive fury can be appeased by harmony and balance. One of the most gloomy and complex myths is that of the Osiris judgment, but not the one that refers to his death and resurrection, but one that involves his death before being killed by Set. In this story, Osiris, in his wise and fair king, presents himself as a leader who has been so ideal that his popularity begins to challenge the authority of the gods, especially that of Set, the god of chaos. By feeling threatened by justice and the order of Osiris, Set, in an act of jealousy and ambition, he draws a plan in which he deceives Osiris to enter a sarcophagus that was designed exclusively for him. This story is less known because it focuses on the vulnerability of Osiris and the human nature of the gods. The Egyptians believed that even the most powerful gods could be vulnerable to betrayal, pride, and ambition, which shows the most human dimension of their myths. Beyond the best-known gods, there are also stories about mythological beings that inhabit the kingdom of gods and humans. The god Geb, who represents the earth, has an intriguing story with his sister Nut, the goddess of heaven. Geb and Nut loved themselves deeply, but Ra, seeing the proximity between them, separated them, dividing the sky from the earth. This story, although less known, symbolizes the deep link between earth and heaven, and how the Egyptians conceived the separation between cosmic domains as something essential for the order of the universe. Although Nut and Geb remained separate, their eternal love was reflected in the way in which the Nile flowed between earth and heaven, joining both worlds symbolically. This story offers a poetic vision about distance and union, teaching us that even what seems to be separated by forces cosmic can be intrinsically connected. Tanit's myth, a less famous but very significant goddess, tells the story of how she was the first to possess the power of creation. In tradition, it was believed that Tanit was in charge of insufflating life in the body of humans created by Ra. However, over the years, its history went unnoticed, eclipsed by the best-known narratives of Isis and Hathor. Tanit represents the origin of life, the germ of existence itself, and its role as a life-giver in the first moments of humanity reflects the importance of the female principle in the creation and sustenance of the world. In the darkest stories of Egyptian mythology, there are stories about the relationship between Set and Horus, but not only as the two enemies in the eternal struggle for the throne of Egypt, but in their encounters in which Set, although antagonist, offers valuable teachings. In one of these stories, Set takes Horus on a trip through the desert, where he shows him that the path to wisdom is not direct or easy, but full of obstacles and sufferings. Set, like Horus, represents necessary aspects of the balance between chaos and order. Its relationship is not only a constant struggle, but also a lesson on how adversity can be the key to personal growth and final victory. Finally, one of the most intriguing but forgotten stories in Egyptian myths is that of Biz, the dwarf god of joy, music and home protection. Although he is not given much attention to the best-known stories, Biz played a crucial role in the daily life of the Egyptians. He was worshipped in homes and was represented as a comic but powerful figure who scared away evil spirits and protected mothers and children. Its unique character and its connection with family life reflect the importance of joy and protection in the context of Egyptian domestic life. These less-known stories remind us that Egyptian mythology is as rich and multifaceted as the Egyptians' own lives. Each story, however small or less remembered, has something valuable to offer us, be it a reminder of the importance of cosmic balance, a reflection on the duality of life and death, or a lesson on resilience and growth. In the vast universe of Egyptian mythology, even the most hidden myths keep deep secrets that continue to resonate with humanity today. Egyptian mythology, full of stories about gods, myths of creation and underground worlds, remains a fascinating enigma both for scholars and for simple curious. Throughout the centuries, the Egyptians read complex stories, deep symbols, and legends that seem to cover everything known, but they also leave unanswered questions. These mysteries continue to attract those who dare to investigate the darkest secrets of ancient civilization. Who were the Egyptian gods really? What motivated their actions, and how did they influence the destiny of the universe and humans? Egyptian mythology was not only a way of understanding the world, but also a way of answering universal questions that still remain unanswered today. One of the most enduring mysteries is the origin of the Egyptian gods. While the myths of creation, such as those of Heliopolis, Hermopolis and Memphis, tell us about the creation of the world and the appearance of the gods from the primary chaos, we are never offered a definitive response on how or why the first arose gods. In the cosmogony of Heliopolis, the rising sun, Ra, emerges from the primary darkness of the Nun, but where does Nun come from? What was before creation? The Egyptians believed that Nun represented the primary chaos, the primary water, from which everything arose, but it was never clarified what existed before him. This knowledge vacuum suggests an eternal question: is the primary chaos the only constant in the universe, or there is something beyond, something that neither the gods themselves can understand? Another mystery that remains a challenge for scholars is the exact role of the gods in human life. While Egyptian mythology tells us stories of gods that interact with mortals, granting blessings or bringing justice, stories about their direct interventions are limited. For example, how did the gods decide when to intervene in human affairs? Why, if Ra, the creator god, was the king of all, did not avoid the betrayal and death of Osiris at the hands of Set? The relationship between gods and humans was deep, but also mysterious. The Egyptians believed that pharaohs were representatives of the gods on earth, but what allowed pharaohs to be closer to the gods than common people? This enigma about the connection of gods with the human world remain a subject of debate and interpretation. The death and resurrection of Osiris, one of the most central myths in Egyptian mythology, is another of the great mysteries. Osiris, after being killed by his brother Set, is reborn thanks to the magic of Isis and Nephthys, which allows him to govern the underworld. But why Osiris, who was a fair king and loved by his people, was chosen to suffer such a brutal and symbolic death? What teaches us this story about the nature of death and rebirth? The Egyptians considered that death was not the end, but a transition to another type of existence. But is resurrection possible after physical death? The story of Osiris raises philosophical questions about life, death, and destiny that are still subject to reflection. The role of Set, the god of chaos, also remains a mystery. Traditionally, Set is seen as the antagonist in the fight against the order represented by Horus, but his figure is much more complex. Set is, in its own way, essential for the cosmic balance, since without it, the concept of order would not make sense. If chaos did not exist, how could order be defined? Set, who was also worshipped in some regions of ancient Egypt, makes us ask ourselves, is chaos only negative, or has an essential role in the cycle of creation and destruction? Can chaos be necessary for the balance and renewal of the universe? These questions are still subject to interpretation and reflection, making it clear that Set is not simply the bad personified, but a cosmic force that brings both destruction and renewal. Another mystery that has baffled Egyptologists is the connection between gods and temples. The Egyptians erected impressive temples dedicated to their gods, but how did the gods really interact with these sacred spaces? It was believed that the temples were the home of the gods on earth, but what happened inside them when no one saw them? The rituals and ceremonies in the temples were fundamental to maintain the cosmic balance, but how did the gods respond to the prayers and offerings of the faithful? The mythological stories tell us how the gods manifested in various ways, but we always have the doubt of whether these manifestations were simply symbolic or if there really was a tangible connection between the gods and the temples. The meaning of the duat, the Egyptian underworld, also remains wrapped in mystery. In Egyptian mythology, the duat is the kingdom that the dead must access, where they face Osiris's judgment to determine if they deserve eternal life. However, how was that kingdom really? The funeral texts, such as the Book of the Dead, give us some clues about the journey of the soul, but never show us a clear and detailed image of the duat. Is it a physical place or a spiritual kingdom? How is life there for the deceased? These questions are still unanswered, leaving the duat as a space that oscillates between the real and the metaphysical, a terrain where souls roam and face the evidence of their earthly existence. The relationship of the Egyptian gods with the sun is also an issue that generates many questions. Ra, the solar god, was the creator and the king of the gods, but is often described as distant and difficult to understand. Why the sun, so essential for life, was associated with such an imposing god? If Ra was the source of all creation, why wasn't it more involved in the daily affairs of humans? Why, after having created everything, seemed to maintain a distance with his own creation? The connection between Ra and the sun is one of the most ambiguous issues of Egyptian mythology, and still leaves us a sense of mystery about the true role of the gods in the life of humans. Finally, one of the most disconcerting questions that Egyptian myths leave us is, why, despite their wisdom, the gods did not avoid sufferings and tragedies? The Egyptians believed that the world was governed by the principle of Mat, the cosmic order, but even so, myths are full of stories of suffering, betrayal, and chaos. The death of Osiris, the eternal struggle between Horus and Set, and the darkness represented by Apophis seems to reflect a universe full of chaos despite the attempt of the gods of maintaining order. If the gods had so much power, why didn't they avoid human suffering? This contradiction between divine power and human tragedies reminds us that Egyptian mythology does not offer easy responses, but challenges us to reflect on the complexity of the universe and our own existence. These unanswered questions are what make Egyptian mythology remain so fascinating. Each story, each symbol, hides more than what they show us with the naked eye. The Egyptians not only created a world of gods and myths to make sense of their lives, but also left us a legacy of questions that continue to resonate in modern humanity, reminding us that there are mysteries that, perhaps, can never be completely resolved. Egyptian mythology, with its complexity and depth, remains an inexhaustible source of fascination for those who seek to understand the origins of human thought and their relationship with the divine. Although the stories of Horus, Ra, Osiris, Set and other gods were narrated thousands of years ago, their lessons and symbolisms continue to reverberate in contemporary culture. Today, we find an immortal legacy that not only tells us about gods and heroes, but also about emotions, dilemmas, and the most universal aspirations of humanity. In a modern world full of uncertainties, Egyptian mythology continues to offer answers, even if they are metaphorical, about order and chaos, life and death, love and revenge. Through the representation of the gods, the Egyptians tried to make sense of the inexplicable, and that search to understand the universe remains relevant in our daily lives. The stories of sacrifice, justice, rebirth, and balance continue to teach us fundamental lessons about human nature and the role that each one plays in the creation of their own destiny. Beyond its spiritual teachings, Egyptian mythology also has a deep impact on modern art, literature, and cinema. The iconic symbols, the images of the temples and epic stories have been reinterpreted again and again, feeding the collective imagination of cultures around the world. However, the true legacy of Egyptian mythology is its ability to continue questioning, inspiring, and connecting generations, creating a bridge between the past and the present. The questions left by the ancient Egyptians about the cosmic order, the role of the gods, and life after death still challenge us. How different is our relationship with the divine today? How do we understand the concept of justice, of creation, of sacrifice? Do we still identify with those gods and their struggles? Egyptian mythology is not only a vestige of the past, but a proof of eternal human search to understand the inexplicable. In a world where the tangible and the intangible are intertwined, Egypt's stories remain a compass, inviting us to look towards the mystery with astonishment and reflection. The power of these myths does not reside solely in what they tell us, but in how they continue to speak, how they continue to model our understanding of existence, even when millennia have passed. Thus, Egyptian mythology remains alive. In every story, every symbol, every god, beats a message that does not lose validity. The echoes of their wisdom still accompany us, reminding us that, although time passes, the deepest dilemmas of humanity remain the same.